We should be live. Let me just double check real quick that we are.
We'll
Uh,
do it live.
we'll do it live. I'll write it. We'll do it live. Oh my god. That will live on forever, won't it?
How many years ago was he fired at this point? It's been a while.
It has been a while. Also, we are live. I'm getting sound from both of us, which should be good.
Cool.
Yeah. No, it's been a long time. Swag. All right. Anyway, let's get into it. People aren't here for doing it live references, hopefully. All right. So this is a first attempt at doing a live version of the unit comparisons for Wargame Red Dragon, and part of that is because today, instead of looking at any particular coalition, we're actually looking at Blue 4 in its totality. So everything from USA, UK, France, West Germany, Canada, etc. And we're also doing it for a spec, so motorized spec. The rest have been general. And for this, I've brought on a very special guest here, LordPie from the Bootcamp Discord, a very skilled player. You want to say hello, introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is LordPie. I like this game. I've played since 2020, and yeah, it's a good game.
Fair
You
enough.
should and you should play Blue Moto because it's the best deck.
Yeah, well, so that's the other. So to expand on sort of what I was starting to say there, Blue Moto, Blue Four in general, like there's so many coalitions. Well, there's so many nations in here, right? There's so many options, and there's very few activation points, only 45. So the other part of why I want to do this live is because I really think that we can't necessarily let the unit comparison stand in isolation like we could with smaller self-contained nations and coalitions. We really need to get an explanation on how this deck is going to look, the sorts of things that we want to do with it. So we're actually going to build a deck here today, and I want to stress that the deck that we build is not a be-all, end-all. This is the best Blue 4 Moto that you're ever going to see. It's just going to be our take on some things that we think are solid, that Lord Pi, who plays Blue Moto, I believe in 1v1 ranks.
Yes, it is probably my most played ranked deck at this point.
Yeah, some things that Lord Pie in particular thinks are very solid. I actually never play Blue Moto, so I'm really excited to learn about it. And we're going to go tab by tab. So if you are interested in a particular tab, feel free to skip ahead to that. I'm also going to be releasing the tabs as their own separate videos. That'll come up sort of probably this upcoming week, I would imagine. And let's go ahead and get started. How do you deal with the logistics tab with only 45 activations points? Because I'm used to jamming in all 5 cards.
Yeah, so I don't think that this deck needs a fob. I used to run it with a fob, but I think that when you run it without a fob, it makes the whole deck a lot stronger. Um,
Now
Partly
that
be
that right away, I'm just gonna stop you. I'm just jumping right here. I know it's very early, but right away saying don't run a fob is so weird to a lot of players, especially new players, because it's just sort of part of what you think about bringing, right? You need your forward operating base, you need that ability to resupply. What about the playstyle here and sort of our expectation for the rest of the deck allows you to get away without having a fob?
Yeah, so when I first started playing this deck, I had the exact same concerns that you laid out. I want a fob to resupply my helicopters, resupply my units in general. It's a good thing to have. And what I basically ended up realizing is that 2 card supply trucks is plenty fine, as far as supplies go, to rearm helos and to rearm all of your units. And the benefit you get from having 75 extra points in the opener is massive. Um,
So we're really
the
looking for that explosive opener, grab some ground, really punish your enemy for not having those 75 points to help them out.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, I mean, this is my personal opinion here, but I think Blue Moto has the strongest opener in the game, aside from completely helo choosing someone. So getting the extra 75 points goes a very, very long way with this deck.
All right, fair enough. So how do you recommend we get started then?
Yeah, so for CVs, you want a vehicle CV and you want an infantry CV. For vehicles, you kind of are forced to have really pick 2 options. Um, you want to avoid Jeep CVs in general because it's a Jeep CV. They're 5 strength, they have no armor, and a stiff breeze will kill them. So the cool thing about this deck is that you have 2 CVs that you can pick from. There are 6 availability and 10 HP, which is really, really nice. because that means you don't have to run 7 CVs only.
Gotcha.
And those 2 CVs are the Humvee CV from that you get in US and the
Okay.
Buffalo CV in South Africa.
Gotcha. So let's just take a look at those real quick here. Rattle BV, 10 strength, 2 frontal armor on the Rattle. Is that
Yeah,
usually
Buffalo.
worth 15 extra points?
So if this came at 6 availability, yeah,
Oh, wait.
but
Oh, I
that
can't
only comes
listen.
at
I
4
apologize.
availability. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, okay, so that's the Buffalo BV. Same speed, it looks like. Different size. Humvee is a little bit smaller, which is like pseudo ECM, right?
Yeah, so the size increments are on 5%, unless if you're the French very small, where you get 20% ECM for whatever reason. So you're not when you like when choosing between these, you're not really looking at the size as a determining factor. It's whether or not you think having some front armor in exchange for no gun is worth it or not.
Gotcha. Well,
Um,
I tend to think that these things will, while they may be more resistant to indirect fire, like mortars, will probably still die to anything with a gun that can shoot back anyway. So I'm gonna go with the Buffalo. We'll take our
yeah,
armor. We'll be a little bit more protected there, and then command infantry probably next.
yes. So there's exactly one option to pick for
Oh,
this.
let me guess.
Um,
Is it this?
Almost,
Oh
actually. You have a
man.
slightly better option.
Okay.
You can take the Panthers. Sorry, the Lynx H7.
Oh, it's the
You,
same helicopter, isn't it? Right.
it's better actually because it's a little bit faster at 320 instead of 300,
Hmm.
and it's a got better size.
Gotcha. 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 Well, that does
So
make sense. And the
yeah,
size is like the same as for vehicles that we just discussed.
yeah. So medium will be 0 ECM, small will be 5 ECM. It won't make a whole big deal of difference, but if you can min max for the same price, you might as well.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I don't think the fuel and autonomy will really matter all that much here, especially
Um,
for CVs. Like, you're flying the location, you're going to drop off. If you can get some combat out of it, great. If you can't, well, that's fine. And frankly, that's more than enough autonomy anyway. So let's go ahead and grab that. And then you said 2 cards of supply trucks, and I'm
yes.
really curious what your answer is for this because I still cannot decide which size supply truck I like better. Like, the 20 pointer tends to be the one I use the most often, but like 30 pointers are kind of nice. Like the Mancot 1, the Oshkosh is always sort of a nice thing to have. Where do you really end up here?
So I go 20 pointer and 40 pointer,
Hmm.
and I use them for different things. 20 pointers I kind of use to resupply my infantry, because they're cheaper, and I don't want to have to buy a 40-point supply truck to resupply, you know, 1 or 2 infantry squads.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I pick 20 pointer over like 30 pointer or anything less because it's a perfect balance of cheapness and having all the nice soft stats of like good off-road speed, for example, and good cost efficiency.
Yeah, I suppose that makes sense. And does the off-road speed really matter all that much for resupply? I mean, I'm
Yes.
okay. Can you expand
I
on that a little?
Yeah, I personally find waiting for a 15 pointer or anything worse to actually get through a forest to be like watching paint dry.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
like if it's above 20, it's tolerable for me. So if it's 20 or above, it's tolerable.
Gotcha. So if we look
And
at this, then like the 20 compared to the 15 of the Rio, that's only 10 km/h difference. But then we get down to the Samel 50. That's 50 km/h. I guess that's like what you'd expect out of maybe some middle end mechanized units.
yeah, 50 is not so hot to say the least. Um, and we are playing blue motorized here, so everything should be fast. Like you don't want your supply trucks to not be able to catch up with the rest of your units.
Gotcha.
And while 60 is tolerable-ish, I'd rather not have to deal with it if I can take something that's 70.
Gotcha. Well, if this wraps us up for logistics, there's just one more thing I want to say before we move on to infantry, which is I think generally speaking, we're happy to take questions from anyone who may be watching on YouTube. This is live, so if you have questions about particular units or particular logic, feel free to chime in and we'll do our best to answer. Otherwise, we're just going to be walking through tab by tab by tab, building a deck, offering the explanations that we can, and hopefully helping out anyone who wants to see this sort of deck as a more viable option for them. So, do we have anything else for logistics?
Yeah.
Ooh.
So the one note with the 40 pointers is you can take any of the 40 pointers, just not the South African one, because it lacks armor.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
which does make a pretty big deal in case of like you an autocannon is shooting at you. That can be the difference between dying more or less right away, or maybe being able to save your supply truck.
Yeah, I guess that makes a lot of sense. And that just has to do with the oh, it's kinetic does the damage labeled on the gun to one frontal armor, but does double to 0, correct?
Yeah, yeah,
Right. So
and
anything 10 AP or more will still one shot the Oshkosh, but anything 5 AP or more will one shot the cargo.
right. You're really not looking for like one-shotting because if it's a tank, you're dead anyway.
That's
You're
fair.
more looking in the case of like if an autocannon can get a single salvo off, where
Hmm.
if an autocannon can fire 2 shots, that can be the difference between losing your unit and keeping it alive.
Fair enough. Okay,
Uh,
Oshkosh it is. Although I think the Hempt also. So these two, yeah,
yeah,
everything
either
with the.
either one, but the
Gotcha.
South African one exactly.
I like the paint job on the Oshkosh better. It's more like I don't know. It's sleek. It's less hidden in the wood, sure, but I don't know. It looks. Yeah. I guess some might call that a little bit plain Jane, but yeah, I like it. And yeah. Anyway, that's what I'm going with.
Yeah.
So that wraps up logistics. Let's move on to infantry. And the first thing I want to say here is there is so much infantry. Look at this. Holy cow, man. Like, this is just. I already don't like building Eastern Bloc decks because 3 nations in a coalition is a lot to look at. And yet, at the same time, when I was looking at Blue and Blue Moto in particular before this, I was also kind of scratching my head because in so many coalitions, you're looking for those prototype units. And just as an easy example here, we have the French Milan F1 and F2, but not the F3, which can make particularly French national decks very surprisingly strong in their ATGM department. So, how do you deal with, on the one hand, having so many options, and on the other, losing so many options with those powerful prototype units, both in terms of infantry and their infantry fighting vehicles?
Yeah, so as far as options go, I like it a lot. It's why I have, I think, 15 versions of this deck, because there are so many different things I can do just in the infantry tab alone. And as far as like for picking things, I kind of come in with an idea on how I want the deck to function more or less in the infantry tab, and then find the options that go ahead and do that.
Okay.
So with so many options, I don't really think about losing proto units as much. Like for example, would it be nice to have Legion 90 in this deck? Sure, but I'm not going to be missing it, if that makes sense.
That does. I do want to nail down on something you said a little bit before that, though, which is you have to decide on how you want to play the deck. And specifically, if I'm playing something like, I don't know, Baltic Moto, maybe there's a couple different ways to play the deck, but in general, you still really have a narrow selection of really powerful options for that. And the options almost define the way that the deck can be played. This is particularly true for something like South Africa and South Africa Moto, where the units in the deck really do limit your ability to play certain styles of play. So that almost seemed to imply that you have enough options here, you can make of it what you will. Is that the case?
That is exactly the case. Like in Baltic Moto, the playstyle is you have a heal drop followed by KTs and P on PSVs, and you rinse and repeat. Um, with Blue Moto, there are, at least in my opinion, kind of 3 main different ways you can design your infantry tab, and those will all generate different types of playstyles.
Do you want to talk a
So
little bit about that before we really get down into putting unit cards into our own deck here?
yeah, so the reason why you have so many different ways to play Blue Moto is because, at least in the infantry tab, is because of the SA update that happened by adding so many nice units. And it
Okay.
allows you to basically play like pre-patch Blue Moto, but with some SA influence as one play style. You could also run something that's a lot easier, where you make use of a lot of SA units in a more kind of easier to understand way. Um, so that's and you really rely on shocks when doing that. So that's playstyle number 2. And playstyle number 3 is more of an elite spam playstyle, similar to how Baltic Moto is an elite spam playstyle.
Gotcha. And I imagine you have just so many different elite options from all the different. I mean, yeah, look at that. Holy cow. So I guess if you wanted to, you could take 4, 5, 6 cards of elites, although I'm not sure I'd recommend all that many. But, I mean, look at this.
Yeah,
SAS, SASF, SASR, Shiatet 13, Core Mariner. Yeah, okay. I
there's a
mean,
ton. Sadly, they're not the good core Mariner. Um, but I
Yeah,
mean, you have
yeah.
a ton of units you can take, as you said, just in the elites alone.
By the way, just out of idle curiosity, would you stack up the, as you said, not as good Core Mariner against the Commander Marine? Which one comes out on top?
Oh, I take Commander Marine. The
Gotcha.
Commander Marine will have an elite carbine, which makes a pretty big deal.
Hmm.
Um,
As opposed to the
their
battle
lo-
rifle of the Core Mariner.
yeah, their launcher's a touch better.
Yeah,
It's a Gustav M2 versus an LRAC.
19 versus 18 AP. All right. Well, okay. So with that out of the way, which one of those three options is how you'd recommend we build this particular deck?
Yeah, so whenever I recommend Blue Moto to newer people playing the deck, I usually go with option two, which is the more shock-heavy playstyle and a more straightforward way to incorporate SA into the deck.
Gotcha. So I guess it's a little bit less high risk there if you lose the high value elites that you maybe are a little bit less familiar with having to value and having to keep safe.
Yeah, like you still definitely will use a lot of elites, both in the infantry tab and the recon tab, because they do work together in that sense.
Okay.
Um, but you're not going to be, for example, like spamming Commander Marine or like Shy Tet as a critical part of your deck.
All right. So let's get into it then, and let's start. If we can, let's go cheaper on the left, so at first picks, to more expensive, and then weapons teams if we can at the end. If you're all right with that sort of organization, it really helps me keep things straight here.
That's exactly how I build my decks.
Oh man, finally someone who sees sense. I've talked with people who do it the other way around. So they're going, "Do you wait? No, it's just wrong." So okay, I'm glad to
Yeah,
hear that.
I'm in your camp on this one.
So speaking of cheaper stuff, though, all reservists are prototypes, so we get no reservists.
Yes,
So your
correct.
cheapest are going to be your 10-point lines. Is that something that you take building the deck this way, or do you just move straight on to shocks?
Yeah, so you definitely do take this. In the way that we will be building it, you take either Bocop or Bocop 90 in the Ratel 20. Um,
Okay, so that's going to be a 5-point difference here, Bocop versus Bocop 90, and the main difference is the launcher. And then the FN Mag is slightly better than the Bren, unless I'm mistaken as well, right?
you're good, yeah.
Oh, sweet. Nice, got it. And then the Ratel 20, I mean, this vehicle just has everything you could want from a vehicle. And the particular comparison here that comes to mind, just if you're looking for why, is going to have to be, oh, where is it? The French.
The Vab.
Yeah, I missed it. There it is. The VAB T2013. And I don't know which one of these two is the higher DPS. I was actually going to ask you for that. But the thing that always
So
sticks out to me is the 2 frontal armor versus 1.
yeah, that's the critical difference here. For why the Ratel 20 is so strong. The off-road speed that you get, the extra off-road speed you get, is really nice. But having two front armor is a big deal because it means you're not going to get killed by autocannons as easy. Additionally, as well, whenever you play against mech, you can't die to Browning spam or get stunned by Browning spam, which is very strong.
Gotcha.
The
Now,
two front
I
armor
do
is a
have to ask,
big deal.
does the amphibious ever matter?
Um, yeah, so like there are certain strats that you can do on Hell in a very small place where you can make use of the amphibious capabilities. It's incredibly niche and it's not going to be like an actual reason to take one unit over the other because in 95% of all other circumstances it won't make a difference at all.
Okay. So, do you recommend then the 10-point Bocop or the 15?
So I usually take the 10-point Bocop because I want these to be cheap. I view the Bocop and Ratel 20 combo as more of a shell to get a Ratel 20, with infantry as a nice bonus to screen for your more expensive infantry. So with that in mind, I tend not to value the bonuses that you get with the Bocop 90 as much.
Gotcha.
That being said, it's not like it's a bad choice. I think either choice is fine. I would just rather have this a little bit cheaper so I have other points for other
Gotcha.
things.
And the next question I'm going to ask, usually people will give the same answer over and over and over, but I'm curious which one it is. Up vet or down vet?
Yeah, so for the Bocop and the Ratel 20, I actually downvet these because I really don't want to run out of Ratel 20s. And I'm going to be using it from pretty close range, ideally anyway, so the upvet won't matter quite as much to me.
Gotcha.
Um,
And
it's
then
more so that I don't run out.
just devil's advocate here because, I have played mechanized from time to time. We've started from cheap to expensive, and our cheapest option is 25 points how is that economically viable? Like we're gonna have to talk about the logic behind calling out some of these units, because this just seems like it could get really expensive really quick without any other supporting or complementary units to just infantry.
Yeah, that is definitely a concern, and I think this kind of gets into what's called the Moto tax, where whenever you buy anything wheeled, you're paying a 5 point tax on it because it's wheeled. So that's why you kind of don't want to build Moto decks around a lot of line infantry, because as a higher percentage of the points you're spending, you're paying the Moto tax more often, if that makes sense.
Gotcha.
Um, and the way that you kind of get around it, the fact that everything costs so much, is the fact that everything is so good and so fast that you can ideally take really strong positions early on and play off of that, and play off the fact that your units are just so good at what they exactly do.
Gotcha. All right. So with one card of book up and rental 20s, where do we move on to next here?
Yeah, so I think at this point what you want to do is you want to kind of pick up some baseline shocks, and those are either going to be Stormer,
Wait, so we're
Canner,
done with just rifle infantry? Complete?
Yep,
Oh, wow.
yep.
Okay. Yeah.
Like you want to pay the Moto tax as little as possible as a percentage of the units that you purchase. So you need everything to be as effective as possible, which is why you just go straight for shocks and elites at this point on, in most cases.
Gotcha. So I'm sorry, I kind of missed the ones that you said in particular because I was listening to no more lines. Commandos 90 was there?
That is something you can consider. There are kind of three options here. You got Commandos 90, you have Stormer, and
Okay.
you have the Can Air 90s,
The what 90s?
the Canadian Air 90s.
Oh, Can Air. Okay. Stormer. Let's just go with the Stormer and Canadian Air 90s for right now, because I think that's what you actually said, and then I misheard. So let's find Canada A. There we are. Nope. Yeah. Canadian Airborne 90. So 20-point Stormer, 25-point Canadian Airborne 90. Would you like to tell us a bit about these?
Yeah, absolutely. The differences here that you're really looking at are the fact that whether or not you value Carl Gustav M3 over the M2. And the reason why you would do this is you get a little bit of extra AP, and you get the 875 range.
Gotcha.
Um,
And does the look to MG3 versus Mini-Me really make a difference here, or not so much?
So yeah, that's actually a really good question. I don't want to go on too much of a tangent here, but I am slowly coming around to the idea that the MG3 might be better than the Mini-Me, especially with the battle rifle, because you get more suppression. Um, there's a deep rabbit hole you can go down on that, but really what you're doing is you're trading 10% accuracy for 15 more suppression, and honestly, they're both amazing. I almost said ATGMs. They're both amazing MGs, so that shouldn't really be what you're looking at for comparing things. It's just whether or not you value the launcher.
I guess I
That's
can
the
see
point.
how that can become a rabbit hole too, because then it becomes a question of, is the infantry doing the killing, or is your support doing the killing? And if your support's doing the killing, then what you want is the quick stun, not necessarily the one extra point of damage per unit time off the mini-me. So I am interested in that rabbit hole, but maybe later, as you
Okay.
said. So Carl Gustav M2, Carl Gustav M3, which do you usually take here?
Um, Kind of the bad answer is there's no usually for me here. I try to get some sort of longer ranged
Well, let
type
me ask
of.
this a different way then.
Yeah.
Does the vehicle matter?
Between the two of those, no, because you both get 2 armor on them, and on the vehicle that you'll take. And it's a Browning versus a not Browning, like, so you're going to be really good either way, so it doesn't matter too much here.
Gotcha. So the 2 frontal armor value is what matters for this more than having
Yes.
the 50 cal. Well, for shocks that sort of makes sense as well. I could see the gun being more important for lines, but for shocks, okay. So
I mean, if you want to do funny amphibious assaults, you can do it with the Bison and not the
yeah, no.
Legion transport. Yeah.
Let's build for sane gameplay, not funny amphibious assaults on one particular map. And so with that, I'm gonna just make an executive decision for us while we're building this particular tab, and let's say the Canadian Airborne 90, because I do really enjoy the Carl Gustav M3. I tend to find it takes people off guard. So we're looking at up vet
Yes.
or down vet for the Canadian
Up vet
Airborne
here.
90. Up vet here, okay.
100% up that. Having elite shocks is really, really important so you win infantry fights quickly.
Very well. So we've gotten that on the way, and we've taken them in the Bison. We still have no paratroopers, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cards remaining. What do we move on to next?
So now what we want is we want some infantry to be really good in the opener and has some longer range and
So,
is durable.
just a question on that. Really good in the opener. Are these two not filling that role?
They are good in the opener, like a Ratel 20 in an annoying spot can be game deciding, and Canadian Airborne in an annoying spot or in general are just good units. But you were looking for something that's very good at being a nuisance in the opener, and for holding like towns long term.
Okay, so what are we looking at for that?
So the units that we're going to be comparing here are the Norlandsjäger or the Buffalo 85s.
Okay, now I see the difference, and we'll get into a bit of explanation here. Let me just do. I think this will be easier. And we're going over into light infantry now, moving away from rifle. So that's going to be the Buffalo 85 and the New Orleans. And actually, let's just show what this tab looks like with everything. There's still a lot of options here. Gurkhas 90 tend to be pretty popular for Commonwealth. Like there's a lot going on. We're just limiting it because, well, we have a specific goal in mind. So between the Buffaloes, Buffaloes 85 or Buffaloes 70?
The 85s.
The 85. Okay, so the 35-point Buffaloes here, and we're going to be looking at the Norlandsjäger from Sweden. One thing sticks out to me right away, and it's the 15 strength. And is this sort of what makes them unique from the shocks that we've taken before?
Yeah, it is definitely one of the reasons why you take these, because you put a double stack of 15 strength dudes in a town, and it will be quite painful for your opponent to get them out, especially because they have a large ammo count.
Gotcha, that makes sense. The main thing that sticks out for differences will be 25 points versus 35 for the Buffaloes, and the recoilless rifle versus the Milan. Are there other things here that I'm missing?
The transport as well will play a factor.
Okay.
Largely due to the cost factor.
Which transport in particular?
So with the Norlandsjäger, you take them in the TGB, because it's the best 5-point Jeep in the game, because it doesn't suffer from the off-road problems that other 5-point Jeeps have.
Gotcha. And for the Buffaloes?
So I have tried them in 3 different transports: a 10-pointer, the K-car, and the Oryx. I
Wow.
personally, for how I call them out, found actually paying the extra 5 points for the K-car not to be worth it,
Hmm.
and I'd rather have them than the 10-pointer. And the use case for the Oryx is a little bit different. We are going more for an advanced helo drop in the style of SA Moto, as opposed to an early double stack in a town to hold that town. So the result is a little bit different. I personally prefer them taking the 10-pointer though.
Gotcha. And I'm just going to ask you sort of why, because particularly in South Africa, Moto, I put everything I can in autocannon just because of sheer weight of numbers of autocannons. And we already sort of have that with the Ratel 20. Is it just redundant, or is this just a different style of play there? Like, what's the reason that it's underwhelming?
So when I'm taking these in the ground, I'm calling them out in double stacks most of the time, or a single stack to replace what was a double stack. And that means that I'm spending a lot of points. If I take them in the K car, that's going to be 50 points a pop for
Yeah.
one of these units. So that's a 100-point call out, as opposed to a 90-point call out.
Okay, that does
And
kind of make a difference there, doesn't it?
yeah, and at least for me, I find the 10-point difference to be a pretty big deal, especially when you consider that the K car is not as good as the Ratel 20.
Gotcha. And just thinking that through, like in isolation, 45 points versus 50, the difference is 1 tick of income. But 90
Right.
points to 100, that's 2 ticks of income. It's 10.
Yeah.
And each individual tick on a conquest game anyway is 7. So you're waiting, what, 10 seconds for that?
You're waiting that, and also it has a pretty big deal in the opener, because those extra few points might be the difference between being able to buy an infantry squad that you want, and that will be more effective than the K cars, or not being able to do that.
Gotcha. So for this particular deck where we've taken Bocop, we've taken Canadian Airborne 90, what do you recommend? The Buffaloes 85 and the Casper Mark II, or the Norlands and the TGB 13?
So usually what I do is I always take the Norlandsjäger just because of how cheap and strong they are.
Yeah.
I do think you can take the Norlandsjäger and the Buffaloes in the same deck and
Oh.
not have a redundancy. It's a little bit niche though.
Okay, we'll stay
I
away
do
from
think,
niche for right now. We'll stay away from that. So Nordlands, and I'm guessing upvetted?
yeah, you're
Gotcha.
probably not going to call out all eight, um, and having them at elite so that the recoilless rifle hits all the time is pretty important.
Gotcha. Now, I the first time I used Norland's Jaeger, I really hated them because 30% accuracy is not all that high. 12 AP is not all that much, right?
Hmm.
So I know people take them and they love that launcher. What's the use case there that really maximizes its effectiveness and keeps you away from doing things like what I did, expecting them to kill a 100-point tank?
Yeah, so what I think the first thing that's really cool about the Neuroziger with the recoilless rifle is the noise value on the gun. The noise value is below 2, which is, to give a reference, a Milan has a noise value of 2.
So
So it's
hold on, what are
quite,
we talking about here for noise value?
yeah, so every time you fire any gun in the game, it has a noise value associated with it, which is what makes units easier to spot when they're firing.
So it's like negative stealth.
Um, yeah, it's exactly like negative stealth. So, like
Okay.
for example, there are certain units in the game that have a noise value of 1, which means they're silence weapons. So they won't get spotted if they fire. Like the prime example are the Jaeger 90 and the Recon Tab here,
Huh.
um,
Which
where their SMG, which is the MP5 SD, if I remember correctly, doesn't make any noise when it fires, which is cool. It's very, very niche, but it's kind of cool. With the
gotcha.
Neuron Zero, because the noise value is less, it makes them harder to spot. Um,
Which
so you
is
can get a
interesting
lot of
because you
shots
can
off.
see the recoilless rifle anyway, but I guess it won't trigger alarms, and it'll be like it's the thing with ATGM facing as well, where if the tank can't see the ATGM infantry firing the ATGM at it, they won't auto face into the incoming missile, right?
Hmm.
So do you get that same sort of behavior here, where if they can't see the Norlands, they'll just keep driving?
That's not really something I noticed, like as far as auto facing goes. It's more for the fact that you can just fire unseen, and it's a lot harder for your opponent to kill you. Like, if you want to, for example, remove an AT-gem from a position, and you know where it is, but you can't get too close, what you do is you move a recon squad up to be close enough, have the AT-gem, and then peek your tanks out. The AT-gem fires, it gets spotted, and then dies.
Gotcha.
When Nordziger are in a town, it can be very hard to do this,
Fair enough.
because they're 15 HP, so they're survivable, and the noise value is less than a Milan.
Yeah, and even if you get stuff engaged with them, okay, they can take a punch. This is starting to make sense now. I can see a little bit of the method to the madness. Okay, so we're not taking both for right now, I think you said?
Yeah.
And so what do we move on to next?
So now what we need is sort of an anti-mech pick, and which is also doubles like an anti-USSR type of pick, anti-US pick, in general anti-5-pointer pick.
Gotcha. Something to make up for the fact that we're paying this wield cost on most of our infantry.
It's less that and more like you want 20 rate of fire launcher to really help deal with scary spam.
Gotcha. So what fits that bill?
So you have the Gurkha's 90 here.
Gurkha's 90. That's going to be back in lights, I think.
Yeah.
Gurkha's 90 right here.
Yep.
Wow. Okay.
And these are nice because they have 20 rate of fire, AP 22, so you can deal damage to vehicles. The fact that they have an SMG isn't super stellar, but you do get a mini, which is nice.
That's a little bit of a weird loadout, I suppose. And the Law 80 should be able to kill, what, 8 armor value in one shot?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Do you know off the top of your head what it is for two-shotting? Because I think if you're using a double squad of Gurkhas in particular, that can often be really important as well.
14.
14.
You need a +8 to two-shot.
Gotcha. Okay. So
So,
Gurkha's
like,
90.
yeah, it's like, for example, like, that'll be really important against, like, USSR, where if you encounter BTRTs, you can two-shot them.
Okay, yeah, because 13 frontal armor value on the BTRT, this gets it done. And I guess a lot of times you have people sort of smack talk Gurkha's 90 because of the relatively low AP value compared to something like, I'm going to have hard time finding it in this deck, so I'm not familiar with it, but, oh man, what am I looking for here? High AT launchers. I don't even know where to look in Blue Moto, I'm sorry.
I
Um,
think you kind of found one of the reasons why I take Gurkha's 90.
yeah, goodness
It's
gracious.
the best AT for this role that you get. If you got Rima, for example, you'd probably take Rima, but Rima 85 are Marine units.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for. I was looking for it's a 24 AP launcher, right?
Rima are 23, I believe.
23. Gotcha.
The Proletarian 90 or 24.
Okay, well, take the AP power that you can, right? Okay.
Exactly. And what's really cool about Gurkhas and why they're so nice in this deck is because they're also 15 strength and they're light infantry.
Hmm. So
So
they sort of can do a similar role to the Nordlands for being sticky in towns.
not so much in towns because for Digger you have them in towns, but these are for forests.
Interesting.
So like
Okay.
you'll go and you'll try to kill a few things, and you have a bunch of ammo, um, to do that because you are 15 strength, and then because you are 15 strength, it's really easy keeping alive. So you pull back, get repaired, and then you go forward again, and you rinse and repeat.
Gotcha. All right, that makes sense. And we have three vehicle options. We have the Stalwart, we have the Saxon, and the Puma HC1. And I play Commonwealth so rarely, I really don't know the difference between these all that well, other than that I usually don't like the Stalwart. But
Yeah.
I don't know if that really matters here.
So the Stalwart has 0 armor, which is just kind of sad. The Saxon has 1 armor and a gun, which makes it, I think by any reasonable metric, infinitely better.
Fair enough. All right.
And the helicopter, it's going to cost way too much for what you want them to do, so you don't bother.
Yeah, fair enough. We'll just take him in the Saxon, and my guess is 8 out of lead again.
That's probably what you should do. I am personally a little afraid of running out, so I downbet them, but I tell other people to upbet them because I have an irrational fear of running out.
Gotcha. Well, I think that's a pretty common theme. I know when I was working on, so I'm still trying to figure out which deck I even like all that much. I mean, I hit Lieutenant Colonel this past week, which for you
Congrats.
must seem like a pretty low rank, but for me, I was quite happy. Thank you. But that was with Landjut, which I was talking with Mint Jellyman about that deck, and he said just up vet, up vet, up vet, up vet. And I was sitting there going, won't I run out of Dragoner? And it turns out you don't, right? Like if things go well, it turns out you don't. And if things go poorly, well, you're kind of losing anyway, right? So it's a bit of an interesting thing there with the fear of running out of infantry in particular. And I don't know. I mean, we're looking at Moto. We have 40 units. They're all relatively expensive. I guess we'll take your advice and do what you say, not what you do this time around, and keep 8. And the only thing I'll say there is, if you do find yourself just really needing an extra couple Gurkhas 90, down vet them, but keep in mind, Elite does perform better than Veteran pretty much across the board. Sometimes it's more or less noticeable, but here what I'm thinking of are, I guess, infantry. I mean, crits are maybe less valuable here than with tanks, but what I'm thinking of mostly is recovery from stun and suppression. So it will take a little bit longer at Veteran than Elite to recover from that sort of stuff. So that's 4 down. We are still in the middle of the infantry tab. Where are we wandering to next?
So now we're going to go pick up 2 cards of commandos.
Ooh.
And what we're picking up here are basically utility type of units. We're going to pick up both the SASF and the SAS, which kind of seems a little bit contradictory for why you would pick up both instead of maybe 2 cards of one, but there's definitely a reason.
I'm happy to hear it.
So the cool thing about the SASF is that by Eugen Magic, they are 25 points, which is like incredibly fantastic. And for 25 points, what you're getting is a carbine, and it's coming at Elite, which is always awesome. An OK launcher, and the manpad part itself looks underwhelming at first, but is actually pretty decent.
Yeah, 3HE, I gotta admit, that makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable here. What makes it pretty decent?
So if you compare these to the SAS, sorry, what you look at is the reload time difference. It's 4 seconds versus 6 seconds. So you can basically launch these manpads out like it's a machine gun.
I've
And
never noticed that before. Holy cow.
yeah. So like what the timing tends to be is that by the time your Strela hits or would have hit not HGM, the helicopter that's shooting at, the next one's already coming out. So when you run these in a double stack, for example, which is how I'd like to run my infantry, um,
You're
that is
taking four
rapid.
shots minimum.
Yeah, yeah. And even the accuracy looks underwhelming, because you're coming at elite, it scales up quite nicely.
Fair enough. So one card of SASF, one card of SAS, and just looking at the helicopters, it's going to be really tempting to take a Lynx H7. Is that sort of a trap, or is that a good idea?
That is exactly what you should do. So the reason behind this is because of the use case. I kind of view the SASF as frontliners because they have that elite carbine, and the fact that the manpads fire so quickly is really nice, and they synergize really well with a lot of your other units. For example, SASF and Northern Zagor synergize really, really strongly in towns.
Hmm.
I think the primary example I can think of is if you're trying to push Alpha Town on Mudfight, you put a double stack of Northern Zager in front and a double stack of SASF behind, and 9 times out of 10 you're going to win whatever infantry fight is there because you have a ridiculous amount of HP with a whole bunch of guys coming out of elite dealing a ton of damage, and you can't basically neuron activate a helicopter to deal with it.
I guess the SASF will take care of it.
Yeah, exactly.
And even things that are relatively far away but not super far away, the Norlands have that recoilless rifle, and they can even give return fire.
Yep.
Dang. Okay, I'm going to have to try that at some point. So if we have the SASF and the Lynx, let's first do the SASF. I'm guessing they're going to be on the ground?
Yeah, you take them in either the K car or the 10-pointer. I used to find the 10-pointer a little bit nicer because it was cheaper. Later on, I like paying 5 extra points for an elite K car. So I
So
take in the K car most likely.
I'm going to make you explain that just a bit, but I'm going to guess first as to why it matters here where we, weren't really valuing it if we were looking at Buffalo's 85, and that's the elite autocannon compared to the lower veterancy. Is that what makes the difference?
Um, it's basically the same reason I gave with the Buffalo 85. Like, I basically, when I was first trying them out, this is like very, very not close to when SA was released. I was pretty skeptical of the unit, and I found it hard to call them out. But as I played more and more with them, it just became a lot easier to do.
Gotcha.
And then I'm like, okay, I might as well get an elite K car for 5 extra points, and they're only 25 points anyway, so it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, I mean, the double stack is 80, which is still cheaper than what we were talking about with the Buffalo's 85.
Yeah.
35 points for the infantry, 15 points for the transport. So, all right, fair enough. We have 1 and 2. And then our last unit here is
And
going to
sorry
be
to
an
interrupt you,
ATGM.
sir.
Oh, no, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So the reason why we take the SAS and the Lynx instead of ground transport is while the SASF are frontliners, we think of the SAS as basically the Taliban. You don't want to have them take a front fight, or like a head-on fight, because you're going to lose. And that's really because you can really feel it that you have the lack of
A
of a
tertiary,
carbine.
yeah, a tertiary that can fight infantry.
Yeah. So like you'll kill line infantry, for example, but it'll be a lot more of a struggle than it should be.
Now,
However, the SAS are awesome for sneaking.
yeah, dude, I had somebody do that to me one time. They put 4 of these behind my air spawn, and my bomber got shot down before it got out of my home zone. I was sitting there going, what the heck
I'm
just happened?
very sorry for you that that happened.
Yeah, so was I at the time. I do have to ask a question about this, though, because recently I actually played a game against Cody Volk in Ranked. It was Paddy Field 1v1, and I brought Landjut against Blue Moto, of all things.
Mhm.
And Cody put a mix of SAS and SASF in the forest on my right, Cody's left, so that the forest side middle zone. And it was a pain in the ass to get rid of, because ordinarily with that sort of infantry engagement followed by fire support, where I basically just took M41A1s and put them behind Dragoner, that usually works pretty well for me. But these guys don't have to micro in order to
Yeah.
target vehicles and IFVs because they have no infantry tertiary to begin with. And that was actually
Yep.
surprisingly effective. Is there utility in that for woods fighting off of these cards usually, or is that sort of a niche case?
It is not niche, that's for sure. It with the SASF, it's really nice to not have to micro with them. Again, if you're playing a deck with a ton of 5 pointers or like BMPTs or BTRTs or any of those terrible units to play against, you do have to micro your other infantry that you're with. But
Gotcha.
it's nice being able to just like attack move infantry forward, not to micro them for too much longer, and then pull them back. It is very nice.
Fair enough. Definite upside of these sorts of units then, even if they do pay a little bit of a price in the infantry to infantry combat alone. So let's look at our last card there, and I'm gonna guess ATGM.
Yes.
Uh,
So a lot of options.
yeah. Wow.
My kind of go-to ATGM card is the Milan 2 and the Fuchs Milan.
So that's gonna be
Uh,
the West German version.
yes.
Milan 2, Fuchs Milan. Okay, 8 at
And
hardened, 6 at veteran. You get an ATGM on the vehicle.
mhm,
A lot of positive points here.
there's a ton of things to compare here,
Yeah, let's
because
go
there's a
through
lot
'em.
of ATGMs. So with the Milan 1, I think the only reason why there are two reasons why you would take this. Reason number one would be if you want to get a card of Ragdoll 20s with the Milan 1, um,
Rethel 20
which is
Milan, ever worth it or not really?
I think in SA it's a nice thing that you can do, but in Blue Moto I don't see it as needed because when you take the Milan and the Ragdoll 20, that's more of a second ATGM card if you take two ATGMs as opposed to your only ATGM card.
Yeah, not really enough. I mean, just AP value on it, I suppose, to
Yeah.
really be a standalone.
So, like for example, if you take the Ratel 20 in the Milan, you may take a Chumat or the RBS ATGM as well, so you don't suffer from those AT problems.
So a lot of people love the Chumont. Is there a reason that you favor the Milan 2 instead of the Chumont if you only take one?
They transport.
Really?
Yeah, Hueys are flying death traps.
Oh, okay. UH-1H, 4, yeah, 4 strength, no gun to speak of. Okay, I can see that being an important thing.
Like it's something I've started doing more often, taking the Chumats, but it is strictly for me a second ATGM card because I don't want to rely on
The fragile
yeah,
UH-1H.
yeah, like oops, I get zoned out by my opponent with AA. Now I can't actually zone them out, which is what I want to be doing.
The follow-up question has to be the RBS 56.
Yeah, it hits like a truck.
It really does. 50% accuracy, 26 AP power. I built a Scandi Moto deck around this and the AA version of the RBS because it's just so incredibly impactful when it hits. What's the reason to favor the Milan 2?
So one thing that the RBS team lacks, really the RBS team lacks two things. First, because it has 5 strength, which is nice because it's survivable. It also has less stealth. It's good stealth versus very good, and that means that you will be spotted more often.
And therefore
when
fired
you
upon
fire
more
it.
often.
Right. So kind of your solution to this is you basically have to place them in towns, which limits you a touch.
Yeah.
Um,
I can definitely see that. I
and
mean, like, does the 5 versus 2 strength matter if what's shooting at you is a tank?
yes, actually. For example, if you have a red 4 tank with 4 HE shooting at you, those 2 strength guys are going to be in trouble, whereas your RBS team can be okay-ish.
Gotcha. Gotcha,
And
gotcha.
in towns, it also scales to that as well.
Yeah,
Like
plus
these are
damage reduction as
painful.
well, so like you're gonna like, be
Yeah.
taking less than 4 damage even from a 4 HE shot.
Yep, they are painful to remove from towns for sure.
Gotcha.
And reason number two that's kind of limiting them in sense is the range. Um, being able to shoot from beyond tank fighting range is really nice, which is why I want to have an ATGM that can do that. And when you play like a deck like Scandi, this isn't as important because you're not playing a Moto deck fundamentally, or if you are, in most cases.
Yeah,
But when you play
Scandi Moto's a
Moto deck,
little odd, I'll admit.
yeah, when you play Moto decks, zoning is really, really important, and getting the extra range step, or having the extra range step at least available to pick, is very, very important. Like you will definitely feel it in game if your only ATGMs are the RBS 56s.
Gotcha. So Milan 2 it is. Fuchs Milan seems to be the way to go. And
Yeah.
usually the logic in general decks is you up vet to get the extra accuracy. Do you need that here with the hardened veteran split from Moto?
You definitely can upset. I do that more often than not. I think 6 AT gems are enough, especially with Northern Zager and AT gems that you get elsewhere. And Milan 2s, they are sub 50% accuracy, so the upvet really does help them out.
Gotcha. We'll take 6 then, and if you find that you're losing all of these, first, try not to. I know, excellent advice. But if you do just find that you need 1 or 2 more down vet, you still have the hardened. It'll impact your accuracy just a little, but it might be something to do until you figure out better ways of keeping them alive. So
And if I may say one more thing for why we picked the Fuchs Milan, why it's so important here.
yeah,
Um, there are certain maps where you really, really need to zone out an area in the opener, and it is very, very scary for your opponent to see 4 AT gems coming at them instead of just 2.
gotcha. So
It's like,
two of these nearby each other, 4 missiles
yeah,
instead of 2.
like on highway, for example, you can put 2 of these on the highway, on either side, and your opponent may have kind of an oh crap moment. There are 4 AT gems coming at me. What do I do?
Gotcha. There is actually one more question I'd like you to answer before we move on to other tabs, and that is,
Yes.
we are 2 tabs in. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tabs remaining because naval doesn't actually exist, and we only have 2/3 of our activation points remaining.
Hmm.
Can we afford to spend this much on the infantry and logistics tabs?
Absolutely. So the main advantage of one of the reasons why I play Moto is because you get that infantry upvet. So you have to take, you really have to make good use of it. And
Gotcha.
you're not gonna be buying a ton of tanks, and you're not gonna be buying, like filling up your helo tab. So that shouldn't be too much of a concern. For like, oh no, I don't have enough tanks. You should not be thinking about that.
Very well. Okay, that's going to wrap up our infantry tab, and let's get a move on to support. What do you say?
Yeah.
All right, support options, and support is a tab that I think we're going to be talking about the lack of prototype units quite a bit here. Is that sort of on the money, or am I missing my mark there?
For me personally, I find that I'm not missing proto units because I kind of have everything I want. Like for example, the Hawk Pip 3 is not proto.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, and neither is the cactus and the yeah.
Right.
Okay. All
Nor
right.
the Gepard or any of the or any really other spags that you're going to consider taking.
Gotcha.
Um, and on top of that, like you also get like for example the HS30 in Eurocore. You get that here. That's not proto either.
Oh, really?
So you kind of get everything that you're really looking for.
Okay. Well, let's start off with anti-air, and then we'll move on to artillery. What
Yeah.
do
So I kind of think so. Their anti-air is really, really critical on exactly how you want to build your plane tab, um, and whether or not you actually want to run artillery.
Hmm.
So I'll start with the former first. Um, Kind of jumping ahead a touch. One of the AT-gem planes that you get in your deck is the A10.
Yeah.
And if you want to run the A10, it's pretty important that you have long-range 9HE AA so that you can bait people and stun them.
And keep that plane alive as well, because it needs to loiter to get all of those missiles off.
Right. Like the number one way that you can get people to waste their ASFs is have them get baited into a Hawk Pit 3. So you get the Rolands here, for example, and the tracked rapiers. I would not run the A10 with the Rolands or tracked rapiers just because it will be a little bit harder to bait people because you lack the range.
Gotcha. And what's the other side of that coin?
Well, if you're not taking the A10, you can take things like the tracked rapiers and the Rolands. And in the case of the tracked rapier, it's really cheap. It has decent range, and it can really, really let out a ton of missiles, which is great for dealing with plane spam.
So we're gonna take a bit of a initiative here from me when I was a sergeant major. I would not touch the A10 because every time I tried to, I let it loiter a little too long, a little too unprotected, and it ended up being a massive point sink for me that didn't really get a lot of return. So we're going to say, okay, if you're looking at this video, if you're a little bit newer to things like Blue Moto, if you're a little bit newer to maybe the game in general, and you really have trouble keeping those sorts of things alive, maybe the A10 is not the best choice for you. So we're going to stay away from that, and if we're staying away from that, what do we want to build our AA net to look like?
So You can still take the Hawk Pip 3 if you want. Again, it's not like if you take the A10 if you take the Hawk Pip 3 you must take the A10. It is just a good unit overall. Um, just kind of, I know that you wanted to away from the A10. I want to say one thing pretty quickly, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, of course, of course. Go ahead.
So the way that I would keep my A10s alive, because I had a similar problem for a while, is I gave myself the hard and fast rule of I do not buy an A10 until I have a Hawk Pip 3 in position already.
So sort of like the USA version of this is you don't buy certain things like the Nighthawk until you have a Patriot.
Yeah, stuff like that. And it's funny you mentioned that because one of the things that you can do with your air tab is build the sort of US plane cancer, which is one of the reasons why you may take the Hawk Pip 3 as well.
All right, you know what?
But
You've convinced me. Let's take the Hawk Pip 3, and when we get to air, we'll keep in mind that we have the capability here from this really just long-range, high-accuracy, hard-hitting AA piece. Is this our first pick?
yeah, we can take that.
And 3 or 4?
Always up that missile. Well, you will always up at your anti-plane missile AA.
And why is that?
So you want to be calling out AA as little as possible, and for all the AA you call out, you want to be as effective as possible. So if it means that if you have to call out 3 Hawk Pip 3s to get the job done, cool. If you call out 4 Hawk Pip 3s to get the job done, then that means you spend 80 more points on something that's non-offensive, which is taking away from your ground game.
Gotcha. And I guess one of these things, too, is I used to just throw AA everywhere, and I always just got, as you said, sort of rolled on the ground, and the AA was only sometimes useful. So I guess with the higher range, higher accuracy, you're maximizing the effectiveness of having these somewhat spread apart and minimizing the overinvestment there. So that might have been redundant, but I'm just trying to process.
Not only that actually, because keep in mind our infantry tab, we have SASF and SAS. Those are also part of our AirNet, which really helps alleviate kind of any sort of AA pressure we might be feeling.
Will these guys actually shoot down planes?
SAS will, SASF will have a hard time because the missile speed is a little slow. But SAS definitely can.
And it probably has to fly pretty much right over them, though, right?
Yeah, it really does. It really is a nice part to add on to your AirNet, though.
Gotcha.
But really, the cool thing with the Blue Moto support tab for like AA and whatnot is fundamentally you buy AA to protect things that you care about that ideally are expensive. But because we're playing an infantry-centric deck where we have a lot of cheap units, we don't have to worry about 80 gem planes nearly as much. Because if they kill, for example, a 30-point unit, who cares? It's only 30 points. It's not like where if we lose a Leopard to an 80 gem plane, that's 100 points. It's over 3 times the cost.
Gotcha. That does sort of make sense. You're spread out a little bit more. Your lower point density, I suppose. Well, actually, maybe not. Just fewer high-value targets. You're not trying to protect a Leclerc here, right?
Yeah, like, you don't have to protect super heavies. You don't have to protect scary tanks or anything like that you have. You're just trying to make sure that you don't get bombed, in essence, and that when you do call out, like, an AMX 10 or something more expensive, that you can punish your opponent for trying to do silly things like trying to kill your AMX 10.
Gotcha. So with the Hawk Pip 3, I'm guessing then that the tracked rapiers are a little redundant.
Yes.
Gotcha. Can you just real quickly, before we move on from them, explain what makes these guys so good? Because the first time I looked at it, I was sitting there going, yeah, you're kidding me. This looks terrible.
So the tracked rapier is really cheap, which is nice, and that makes it a very cost-effective AA piece. For 55 points, you get 60% accuracy, which is not bad at all. And while the range that you get is not as good as a Hawk Pip 3, because they have so many missiles that they can shoot so quickly, I believe they have 8 total, all in the same salvo, you can get a lot off very quickly. So if your opponent calls out like 3 planes at once, for example, a Hawk Pip 3, you can pretty reliably shoot down one of them, in addition to your other air defense. With the tracked rapier, there are scenarios where you can potentially get all 3. More likely you can get 2, but being able to shoot a ton of missiles has a lot of value.
Gotcha. All right. That does make a lot of sense. I guess I would think of this, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but I maybe I would think of this as like a tracked version of the NASAMS. It's going to throw through a lot of its ammunition, and it's maybe not the highest performing in terms of raw stats, but it really just throws out a lot of missiles at once.
So I guess it depends on how you define raw stats. Like if you define raw stats taking into effect cost efficiency, the tracked rapier as from raw stats alone with cost efficiency is one of the best AA pieces in the game when you're looking at chance to hit per point.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's
Yeah,
going to be easier to micro than NASM's actually because it's not fire and forget, um, and because you have so many missiles, um, you will have a lot of missiles that kill planes that you're not going to be wasting as much. The one downside though is that compared to like the Hawk 3 or any other types of A that you might take, you do only get 5 HE,
yeah.
um,
Well, I
which
suppose it is a
will make
little
you
low.
suffer.
Like the 9 HE on the Hawk Pip 3 can crit kill things pretty easily there.
Yeah,
While as
but
the
not
track
only
rapier
that,
can.
it's more the two armor,
Hmm.
two armor planes.
Yeah, I suppose like the 25T and what's the other one? Is the IL-102 armored? I don't remember off the top of my head.
IL-102's got two front armor and two back armor.
Gotcha.
SU-25 base has two front, one back, and of course you have the A-10.
Gotcha. All right, so we have the Hawk Pip 3, and what else are we looking at here for our AA?
Yeah, so really we have to decide at this point if we're going to take artillery or not. Because if we're going to take artillery, then we can get away with two AA pieces. If we're not taking artillery, we should take three.
Is that linked at all to what we take in our air tab, or are we sort of covered as long as we have the Pip 3?
It's not really linked to your air tab as much, because there are ASFs that you can pick ASFs that will do what you want here. And you can justify either them. It's a pretty weak comparison, but
All right.
that really you're basically thinking of, will I get value out of an artillery piece or not by actually calling it out? And the answer is very much player dependent and what you want to do.
Well, let's say that we're good with artillery. We want some artillery. We are going to try and annoy people in as many ways as possible, and shooting them from afar with powerful artillery definitely fits into that. So yes to artillery for this deck for right now.
So in that case, you want to take the Tansam.
The
And
short
reason why I
arrow.
want to yeah. So really, the other, if you weren't taking artillery, you would take the Crotal instead, or in my opinion, superior Crotal, which is a cactus, because I think the unit icon looks cooler.
Oh yeah, much cooler. It really does.
Yeah. Um,
Same thing.
and you'll take the cactus over the Tansam in the case of no artillery, because you don't have to be concerned as much with running out of ammo since you have Spags as well. And you'd rather have the extra, 10% accuracy, which you will feel. However, if we will only be taking two cards of AA, then you definitely need the Tansam because you don't want to, fire all your shots. Then, oops, I have no more ammo.
Yeah, and then oops, the cactus / Crotal dies, and I have no more because I only have 2 cards of AA, etc., etc.
Mhm.
So that seems like it could get real bad real quick. So, all right, that does make a lot of sense. And if you're taking 3, do you want a Spag as well? Or let's say for a minute we were taking 3 and we put the cactus in there. What's
Yeah.
our third pick, just to theory craft it a little bit here?
So there are kind of three picks for Spags I go off of. Either take the BTR-TCM, the VAB-VDAA, or the K263. I personally am not a fan of the Gepard and Moto decks, at least in this Moto deck, because I find it a little expensive for what I want to do.
Okay, so that was the BTR 152, the K263, and what was the third?
The VAB-VDAA.
Okay.
So comparing the BTR to the VAB is pretty easy. The gun is exactly the same. We don't really care about the off-road speed and the amphibious capabilities too much. What you're really looking at is that for 5 extra points, you buy very good air detection without radar versus good air detection without radar.
Gotcha. And that air detection is only planes. It's not helicopters, right?
Yeah, so helicopters in this game are modeled as ground units, for reasons beyond me. So whenever you see air detection, that's talking about spotting planes.
Gotcha. And do you usually find that the 5 points for that air detection is worthwhile?
Um, I go back and forth. Like some decks I take the TCM, some decks I take the VDAA. Like it really depends on after I've played the deck enough how I feel about it. If I
Okay.
feel like I really want it to be a touch cheaper, so I can have like more than the opener, have them easier to call out, then I'll go with the TCM. That's really if that's something I decide during playtesting. I can't make my mind up while I'm building the deck on them.
Gotcha. So we'll leave that to people to decide. And the VAB versus the K263, is there a reason to pay the extra 10 points?
Absolutely, the K263 is a beast. The K263 is a better pivads because you get two front armor instead of one front armor, which does make a pretty big difference.
Gotcha.
So,
Otherwise, it's the same gun, the M168 Vulcan.
yeah. Which means, and like the cool thing with the K263 is you get 0.2 second aim time, two front armor, you get more range for helicopters, which is important, and for a lot more for planes.
Can
And
we just...
because you have 0.2 second aim time, one of the things that you can do is in a pinch, it's really easy to kind of use them for infantry fire support as well, if you have to.
So, about that 0.2 second aim time, let's just say, this is supposed to have a manual gunner, or is it automated?
I know nothing about real life.
Because I just want to say, if this is supposed to have a manual gunner, think about that man's reflexes, because that's just insane.
He's hooked up on a auto Red Bull if that's the case.
Yeah, I'm assuming because it's radar that it's semi-automated in some fashion. In fact, it kind of looks like that because I can't imagine you fit a person in there.
You would know more than me
Well, I mean,
on that.
yeah, I'm not like I'm short, but I'm not that short. Okay, so K263 or those other two, the VAV VDAA or the Israeli BTR 152. But
Yeah.
for this particular deck, since we are going to only be taking two cards, then we go back to it and we take the uh, Tansam short arrow from Japan, and I'm guessing 4 at hardened again, yeah?
Yep.
Gotcha.
Because 50% accuracy means you really don't want to miss, and it really needs the upvet.
Fair enough. I've had these miss 4 shots in a row against a KA-52. I was so sad. It was in the opener, it was on Punch Bowl, and the KA-52 flew way too close to the sun. And any
Yeah.
reasonable game, that would have been a kill. But, oh,
Sometimes you do get moments like that. Basically, you wanted to get to veteran because once you get to veteran, I mean, this may just be confirmation bias and not like looking at raw statistics, but a lot of those problems for me just kind of disappear.
no, I mean, it makes sense. You gain extra accuracy, and you start pushing into numbers where 4 misses is pretty small. I mean,
Yeah.
ignoring, well, with veterancy here, that's going to be what, like 58% or so?
I can check right now if you give me a second.
Yeah, well. All I was going to do is say, like, point 0.4 something to the 4th is still reasonably more likely than you think. But you drop that to, like, 0.25 to the 4th, and that starts getting real small. So, it makes a big difference.
So at hardened to hit a 0 ECM plane, which is going to be a helicopter without range scaling, it's 60% chance.
And
And
at Elite?
at veteran, it's 65. And at elite, it is 70.
Gotcha. So, moving on to finish the rest of the support tab, I'm assuming we take a mortar?
Yes.
And I've
So-
seen somebody take the Rattle 81 recently.
Yes, exactly. This was a pick that I was skeptical on at first when it was recommended to me, because up until this point, I didn't really like 3HE mortars that much, because I'm thinking, why wouldn't I take the HS30? Yes, it got nerfed when SA patch happened, but it's still 35 points for 5HE mortar.
The HS30, that's the 35-point West German.
Yeah. And what I basically found is that the Rattle 81s are great for very fast reaction infantry fighting, supporting your infantry fights, and because they're 5 points cheaper, you can buy like a triple stack a little bit easier.
Yeah, also more ammunition as well. So if you are using them for fire support where they're firing a lot,
Yeah.
you have to rebuy a little less often.
I find that when I call these out in a triple stack, my opponent will often get frustrated enough to actually counter already my mortars, which I personally find really funny when they're doing this against a Moto deck.
Yeah, that is pretty fair. I mean, these things can be devastating though. The game against Cody Volk that I told you about earlier, Rental 81s made my Dragoners very sad.
Yep. I actually had this exact same conversation with Cody not too long ago, in fact,
Huh.
regarding why you take the Rattle 81s over the HS30s.
Yeah.
Like the aim time difference, you definitely feel it. And all you gotta do is just deal a little bit of morale damage to stun guys, if not outright kill them, and you'll win that infantry fight very quickly.
Gotcha. Well, we will go ahead then and take the Rattle, and I'm assuming 6.
Yeah.
Yeah, veterancy on these, from my experience, doesn't really tend to matter that much, and in particularly artillery heavy fights, you'll want to be able to call in more because the resupply on mortars is ridiculously expensive
Yep.
in terms of
And on top of
supply.
that, you don't have a fob as well.
Right, so we'd be burning through cards of resupply jeeps, well, resupply vehicles, and I mean, if you think about the utility on that, right? 2 Oshkosh, and that's a fob plus 5 additional points. So we do actually have a comment. First one of the evening from Jim. HS30 versus M113. 5 points. Isn't the M113 better? Do you want to handle that question?
Yeah, so for 5 extra points, you are buying a touch more ammo. I think when I last did the numbers, it is slightly less ammo efficient when you look at points, but again, that doesn't really matter. You're really just looking at how easy it is to call out a bunch of them. So if you're calling a triple stack, it's going to be 120 points versus 105. And if you feel that, then maybe the HS30 is the right pick for you. If you don't feel that, then you should probably just go with the 40-point ones because you do get a bit more ammo and you don't have fuel efficiency issues.
Yeah, and I guess just to build on that, this is a comment we made a little bit earlier in the night, talking about the difference between 90 and 100 points for a double stack. If you're going to call out 3 of these, and maybe it's not all at once, but it's 3 of them over the course of a span of time, the point difference isn't just 5, it's 15 cumulative. And that's going to be a little over 2 ticks of income, which it won't necessarily feel like that if you're buying them one at a time, but certainly if you buy all 3 or soon, it can be a fair amount of extra time before you're calling in more units. So Jim says, fair enough. Yeah, I agree. The extra range is very nice. The Rattle 81 definitely feels like you're sort of driving right up to combat in order to be effective. And I get it's not quite that, 4,900 meters, but yeah, the range difference is pretty impactful. But
I totally understand that argument. Like that is one of the main concerns I had before I actually tried this out. My main concern was I don't like the fact that the suppression is lower, the splash radius for HE and for suppression is lower on the Rattle 81, and the range itself is lower. I really dislike that. And then I tried it out. I'm like, wow, calling out 3 of these is really, really strong. And I haven't taken the HS30 in a long time now because of that.
gotcha. So we'll say the HS30 is second place, but you know it had a space there in there for a while for a reason. So if you're not satisfied with the Rattle 81 or you want a little bit of a different usage case, maybe you look for the HS30 next pick, but strong recommendation for Rattle 81. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah. As I also point for the Rattle 81, when you build this deck around shocks, if you don't take a unit in the recon tab with Para Pathfinders, which we'll get to later, having a double or triple stack of Rattle 81s to deal with stuff like Core Mariner or Sapri is really nice. Because Sapri can be painful to deal with because they will do very well in infantry fights, and Core Mariner don't need an explanation for how good they are at killing infantry.
Yeah.
But
Jeez.
Core Mariner stunned by 3 Rattle 81 are a great waste of points for your opponent.
Not to mention, if these guys are firing corrected shot because of the engagement with your own infantry, they're going to knock 6-8 strength off of the Core Mariner pretty easily, especially if it's a double stack.
Good.
So I think we're beating a dead horse at this point. Let's move on to MLRS and howitzers. What artillery do you actually take here?
So normally what you would do is you would take a good MLRS system. Like the Valkyrie was a pretty obvious pick because it's a good MLRS system. And the Lars 2 is okay, but everything in my playing experience has basically told me not to take these types of units because I don't want to put myself in a situation in the first place where they will need to be used. Because if I'm playing Moto, I want to be playing really wide, and I want to be spreading my opponent out. And if I'm doing that, NLRS won't be quite as useful for me.
I mean, I guess you pick them apart in different ways with, better situated fire support and not allowing them to build critical mass, whereas this punishes critical mass of infantry, right? So I guess
Right, like I don't
that
want to
makes
get to
sense.
that position as initially. Like there are kind of like two maps where you may be forced to use this, where those are Paddy and Hell, but you can very, very easily get around using them. And additionally, we're not taking a fob, and we want to use our supply trucks and other things. Like as I earlier said, the Scania for our infantry, and the 40-point supply trucks are for like our AA and helicopters.
Gotcha. So the Rhino then is probably going to
Yes.
be an attractive choice. And before we talk about this, the comparison that I have in mind here is, and I'm just looking for the Blue 4 version of the Priest, basically. One of the 50 or so points cheaper howitzers that you might be able to get in higher numbers. Is there a reason to take one of these over the other?
Yeah, so you're gonna kind of avoid the 50 pointers. Even if they were, the priests, or even if they were the priests, you will take the Rhino over them. And the reason being is basically for the same reason as the MLRS. Um, you want to kind of avoid a point where you need these units in the first place. And if you want to use like a priest, you need a decent number of them. Whereas with the Rhino, it's a lot easier to be obnoxious with just one, which is the whole point. You take the Rhino because you want to play obnoxiously.
So from that, I'm
Um,
assuming one at veteran.
yeah,
So that
and
almost makes this into like a sniper type unit. It's not 10
exactly that.
HE, it's not going to be pounding something into submission through sheer just damage over a wide area, but it is going to be targeted pinpoint destruction.
Yeah, so the Rhino is useful for a few things. Well, before we get into what it's useful for, when you have corrected shot firing on any unit, if you hit exactly on top, which is what will happen with corrected shot, your first shot will stun whatever is there. If it's what worth shooting at. If it won't outright kill it. By the time it unstuns, that second shot will be pretty close to landing, and your opponent may not have time to micro their unit away, and chances are they'll lose whatever they have.
It's that accurate on corrected shot?
Yeah.
Dang.
Um, it is scary accurate. So I think with that in mind, you kind of ask what's worth shooting at. So the obvious thing is that you go for our CVs. Jeep CVs, great target. Infantry CVs, great target. Um, you will deal a lot of damage to them, and you will kill them. If you can CV snipe your opponent at playing Moto with this type of unit, that means they have to rebuy the CV, which is 100 points not on the ground. That gives you a lot of initiative to push elsewhere.
Gotcha.
The
That certainly does
second,
sound like it's a compliment as opposed to like dealing with something that you don't want to even really let yourself get into that situation.
yeah. So I'll expand more on that in just a second because I had personal problems running the Rhino when I tried to run it with a fob, because I was using it similar to how you said. Actually, I'll expand. I'll say it right now. Um, when I first started trying the Rhino out, I took it with a fob because I thought I'm running artillery. I need to have a fob with this. I want to use the Rhino all the time. And what I found myself doing is, aside from having a much weaker opener, I found myself playing artillery commander instead of blue moto.
Hmm. And if you're
Um,
gonna do that, there are better decks to do that in.
yeah, and I just found myself just losing games because of it. Like
Huh.
I was rather looking at for excuses to use the Rhino as opposed to creating situations where the Rhino could be useful, if that makes
So
sense.
let's do the math on that a little bit because if you're calling this thing out and you're using it basically in place of the Rattle 81s, you're supporting your frontline engagements, things that are entirely reasonable to do in other decks oftentimes. Your rate of return is going to be relatively low. But if you're using it to do what you said earlier, which is you see a cheap CV or you suspect you know where one is, and you fire at that, this thing costs 130 points. There's no fob investment right now, so it's just 130. It's not effectively 205 because you're running the fob. You kill that cheap CV, nearly paid for itself right there.
Hmm. Yep.
So this almost seems like a responsive buy to you see something it can kill that's worth the
Yeah.
Rhino to kill it.
Exactly that actually. Like you see something that's a problem that you want to deal and you want to deal with it, so you call it the Rhino rather than I'm calling it a Rhino just so I can use the Rhino, where that might be useful in other decks. Um,
I've done
but
that with the Scissor plenty of times.
yeah. So second target you'll go for with this are ATGMs.
Yeah, okay. That makes
You
sense
kill an
too.
you kill an AT gem, which is really easy to do when you have correct a shot on a 2700-meter range. Sorry, 2700 dispersion or 2730 technically. It's really easy to kill it. That means that you can use your fire support easier. It means that you can push the ground easier. Um, but really, what I started calling this out for is actually a response to mortars.
But you're
Um,
counter-firing mortars with this?
yeah. So because when you play an unspec deck, more if someone mortar spams against you, it's annoying, absolutely, but it's not going to be kind of threatening your playstyle potentially. One of the strongest ways to play against infantry spec decks in general is you get 3 or 4 mortars together and then you equalize the infantry fights. If everything is stunned, or so if their units are stunned if your units are stunned and you're playing an infantry spec deck and your opponent's playing unspec, they've equalized the fight and they've taken away your advantage.
Well, as otherwise, since you have that veterancy bonus, even lines versus lines, your lines win.
Right. But when you're stunned, or you're taking a lot of morale damage because of mortars, then your advantages start to go out the window.
Gotcha.
So, what's really nice is if you can sneak some recon around to even spot where the mortars are firing, so you get corrected shot. All it takes is 2 shots to kill I think any mortar in the game.
Gotcha. Well, I'm going to push this just a little bit here because it is getting relatively late. We've been on live for a little while, and we are on our 3rd tab here. So unless there are any closing notes, I think we will wrap up support and move on to tanks. What do you think?
Yeah, just one closing note as well. Obviously you kill AA with this, and that's all I gotta say.
Oh yeah, no. You see a hawk, you see something like that, you see a book. Yeah, that seems worthwhile as well.
Yep, and just needs 2 shots, and that's it.
Okay, so let's wrap up support. Let's move on to the tank tab, and once again, a big thank you to LordPie from the Bootcamp Discord, which is a nice Discord for dedicated 1v1 sorts of games, things like that, for being here with me and explaining Blue Moto. It's not a deck that I'm super comfortable with, but it is one that I hope we all of us can get together and learn and figure out sort of the rhyme and reason behind and build an example deck. Not the only way to play the deck, but certainly one that LordPie, who plays this on 1v1 ranked very often and is a very high ranked player, does tend to bring. So that's sort of our goal here as we move into tanks. And yeah, there's actually fewer tank options, I think, than there are infantry options in this deck, which is a little bit goofy. How do we sort of approach this tab as a general philosophy, and then what units are we going to use to fill it in?
Yeah, so because we want to fill up our recon tab because we get a vet bonus there as well, you don't take a lot of tanks. So with that in mind, you take 2 tank cards max, if even 2.
Can I guess one?
Sure.
I'm going to guess that you take the FL-15.
Actually, you tend not to take that, believe it or not.
Oh, I'm sad.
Because
I'm crushed.
you get a recon variant.
Okay, that makes sense.
So when we play Moto, this is kind of more a general Moto thing. When you play a Moto deck, the tanks you're looking for are like an AMX 10 type of tank if you don't have it, or the AMX 10 if you have it, because it hits really hard and it's wheeled, so it can go with all your wheeled stuff. That'll be tank type 1 you take, and tank type 2 that you'll take will be some sort of heavier tank that can maybe play against other tanks that people will have.
So in this case, we're talking about things like the Bet Gull, maybe the STRB 103C, although it is a little bit of an oddball. And if you want something cheaper, maybe the 1A5 DK.
So actually, your first 2 are really the 2 options that you pick from for that second roll.
Okay, so let's go back here. Let's take a look first at the RCSB, and are we taking this up vet or down vet?
Up vet. If you're using 16, you're doing something wrong.
Gotcha.
Very wrong.
So these go with you in the opener. They exploit gaps in your opponent's lines, get that 16 AP power gun on. What other roles really can this thing serve?
They can do fire support. They can go through gaps later on in the game. That's more of a recon thing, though. You can kind of engineer side shots with them and have them pop out really quickly, and they will do a lot of damage because it is 16 AP at 9 rate of fire.
Here's a question.
Yeah.
Oftentimes especially when I'm playing ranked, when I see what my opponent is playing, I sometimes go, oh, Great, that means that, for example, the Martyr 2 will be really good here, or oh crap, the Martyr 2 is going to get just countered by whatever it is my opponent brings. What are the decks where you're happy to see your opponent is playing it so that you can use the RCSB? And what are the sort of decks where if you see it, you say, okay, I'm going to stay away from this tank because it's just going to be a point sink?
So whenever I'm playing Blue Moto, I'm happy. That's the first thing. But like, I'm not really scared of specific. Actually, sorry, no, I take that back. Um, the one deck I've personally always had problems with using Blue Moto with has been Commonwealth. Funny enough, because all of the IFVs have a lot of front armor.
Yeah.
And that's about what they kind of have going for them, and that's it. Um, in every single other circumstance, I don't care what the opponent has with the AMX 10.
Okay, just bring it.
I
It's
don't.
just that good.
It's just that good. It gets where I want it to go fast. It's got 4 front armor and 16 AP. It's got everything I want.
Gotcha. So let's talk about the Magog 6 Betgal and the STRV 103C.
Yeah. So this is an interesting discussion. Because when there are both there are positives and negatives to both of them. The positive of the 103C is that it has a lot of rate of fire and has 13 front armor. So when you can get the idea behind any of these tanks is you get like 2 or 3 of them together before you take an engagement against another tank. And if you have 3 STRV 103Cs together, that's a lot of rounds downrange all the time that hit pretty hard with 13 front armor.
It's also 240 points. Is that really affordable?
If you need to call it out for this role, yes. Like, you use this to fight other tanks when you have to go head on into them. You try to avoid that type of situation, but if you have to go head on, this is when you call it this type of tank. That situation is when you call it this type of tank.
And what about the
Additionally, as
Betgal?
well, yeah. So the Betgal is again, it's not a bad tank, because AP 17, 10 rate of fire. That's really good. You don't have 13 front armor though. But one thing you do have over the 103C, aside from price, is stabilizer, and on not only a stabilizer, a turret. Some funny things can happen without a turret and stabilizer that the 103C will suffer from, but the Magach 6 Betgal will not.
Gotcha. So it almost feels like a little bit more of a mid-range tank as opposed to one of those C3 where maybe you can get a bit aggressive, but only if you have numbers. Is that sort of a correct interpretation for how to handle these?
Yeah, yeah. When I use the Betgals, I try to use them together, but in groups. But it's not a big deal for to have only one. Whereas with the 103C, it needs more support because no turret, no stabilizer, and
It's just a bit of a
16
squirrely unit.
Yeah. Now, the reason why I said this is an interesting comparison is because as I've played more, and actually before I say that, you also have the speed difference of 50 versus 60 off-road, which does make a pretty big deal.
Oh, I didn't even notice that.
Yeah. So, the reason why this is an interesting comparison is because as I've played Blue Moto more and more and more, I have had a desire to buy these types of tanks less and less and less. Because I found I'd rather buy units on the Recon tab and I'd rather buy AMX 10s. And I just stopped finding reasons to take these types of units because I just got better at playing how the deck how it should be played in the first place.
Gotcha. So they're
I
a little
stopped
bit of a
doing-
crutch. I guess that sort of makes sense from what you've described. 'Cause if you have to go straight down the pipe as Blue Moto, it sounds like something's gone wrong.
Sometimes you're forced to, like on Patty. Oftentimes you kind of don't really have a choice because it's a narrow map. On Hell, the AMX 10 doesn't have much room to maneuver, so you may have to use these types of tanks. But really, on all the other maps, I just found myself using these types of units less and less and less and less. I don't think it's a crutch. I do think it is a useful tool that you can have in your deck. But I found that I'd rather have the activation points elsewhere the more I played, and I'd rather play the more pure Moto style, if that makes sense.
So are we taking one of these, or are we just leaving us this deck at one tank?
We will leave this blank for now,
Ooh.
because we need those points elsewhere, actually, in the vehicle tab later on.
Spicy. Alright, I like it. Let's wrap up tanks with that and move on to Recon. So, the Recon tab for me is always a lot of fun. I actually started off as a Moto player for things like competitive with Quicksilver, who you may know from BWC.
I don't know from BWC, but I know who he is.
Yeah,
Yes.
a very nice fellow, Australian fellow, and a really wonderful Moto player. I think he got up to, I want to say Colonel with Moto, or was it Lieutenant Colonel? I'm not sure. Just like strictly Moto decks before he even branched out to anything else. He's super with it. So I like having this huge recon tab, well, number of cards that you can take, and just jamming lots of good stuff in it. And it spots for itself, and it shoots oftentimes, and it has like really, really good utility. But I've never even tried to put together anything with Blue 4 Moto with this, and I mean, look at this scroll, man. This is beautiful. There's so many choices. How on God's green earth do you even get started with this?
Yeah. So I kind of what I try to do is I try to come in with an idea on what I want to do, and go from there. Which you can only do this because I've had experience, which I know is kind of a non-answer. Um, but there are tons of different combos that you can run with, um, that I think just require a lot of like, personal experimentation to decide I like this unit over another type of unit. Um,
So when you say decide what you want to do, what do you mean by that?
so I think the easiest way to explain this is with starting with recon helicopters.
Okay, so let's narrow
Um,
it down to just those. And that's still a lot of options.
yeah, the cool thing is you don't have to worry about most of these at all for a variety of reasons. Like a lot of your 40-point helicopters, for example, they don't provide any utility. They're 220 speed, 4 strength, so that's not so hot. And yeah, they have very good optics, but you have other better options that provide actual utility.
Like the Gazelle Canon or the Scout Defender.
Yeah. Um, so that kind of brings you to a few obvious choices. Once you kind of rule out other helicopters that have no utility.
Cobra comes to mind.
Cobra's, yep. Cobra's one of them. Scout Defender's another, because, rocket pods.
For 30 points, too, that's particularly cheap.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the Gazelle Snub is... I always think this thing's way too expensive.
I would agree with you. Like, I think yes, you do get utility with it because, as you said, rocket pods, but you're not getting much utility for the price.
Kiowa
And
WR.
the Kiowa Warrior is a wonderful helicopter.
Really?
Yes.
4
You tend
strength,
not to
95 points.
but exceptional optics and Hellfires.
Yeah, but I mean, they're not even ripple fired, are they?
They are not ripple fired. I think the reason why people kind of get sad when they see this unit is they think of the longbow, and when you play US, that's exactly what you should think of. You should think the longbow is really good. Why would I ever take this unit? And in US, you're 100% correct.
But
But
this is not US, this is blue.
right, because if you take the Kiowa Warrior, you get this veteran. So it's very rarely going to miss. And this is more of a later game type of helicopter you'd call out, where you know where the AA is, so you know you can use it safely. And because they have exceptional optics, you can see very nicely into forests. And if something is going to be diving, sorry, not diving, if something's going to be like trying to move toward your helicopter to kill it, you'll spot it from 4,900 meters away.
Gotcha, and I'm assuming this thing should never, ever, ever operate alone.
Yeah, if it operates alone, it dies to a plane, and then you kind of cry.
An experience I'm very familiar with in this game. So, what do we build here? Are we taking one helicopter or two?
So I think we'll take two. We'll take two helicopters, and the first one we'll take will be the Gazelle cannon. We're taking this over the Scout Defender because it's a lot faster.
Really? 310. Oh, geez, yeah, 260.
So, like, for example, we want our recon helicopter, if we're going to be doing big helo drops, to move it at roughly the same speed as our helo drops. The Lynx H7 is 320, the Gazelle cannon is 310, so that's in the ballpark.
Yeah, certainly much closer than 260. And if your recon's lagging behind your helicopters, you're not really going to get the benefit of seeing dangers before they really get into combat range with you. So that seems particularly important. Right. Okay,
and
so we have the
the
Gazelle
next one we'll
Canon.
take, yeah, and the next one we'll take will be the Kiowa Warrior,
Oh,
and we'll
man.
take this upvetted because, again, if you need 4, something has gone wrong. I will rarely call out more than 2 in a game.
Huh. And
But
even then, I bet that first loss really, really hurts.
yeah, like it sucks. If you do lose it, but it's really easy to get value out of this. Like if you think about it, you're spending 95 points for Hellfires, which is the second cheapest Hellfire you can get in the game, right behind the Seahawk. And it's 2,800-meter range, so you will outrange some AA like Strelas, for example. And because it's exceptional optics, it's pretty easy to kill stuff in forests with it, compared to very good.
Gotcha. So Hellfires, I think, are relatively supply intensive. Does this ever really become an issue in a deck that doesn't run any fobs?
Not really, because if you need to resupply, you just call out an Oshkosh, because that's why you had the Oshkosh in this deck in the first place. For our helicopters and AA.
That makes
So,
sense.
you bring it back to your favorite point on the map that's safe. You land it, you resupply it, and then you go take off again, and you annoy your opponent.
Seems good. And like, if you're playing particularly against something that has, 100 to 170 point tanks, which is most things, right? Even mech decks will bring the Leopard 2A1 or the M84, base M84 kind of stuff. One kill and that's paid off. Not to even mention the benefit from the optics. So I guess I can see the logic.
Yeah.
So long as you avoid getting shot, which that's a statement for Wargame. Just don't get shot.
So on that, actually, because you're playing a Moto deck and you will have recon everywhere, and you'll be trying to spread your opponent out, you'll be able to spot your opponent's AA hopefully easier than you would if you're playing an unspec deck.
That is fair. That is fair.
And you'll have if you're paying attention, you'll have a rough idea on where it is. Like, this is not a unit that you call out when you got nothing better to do with your points and you just want to see what will happen. Because if you do that, you're down 95 points. This is a unit you call out when you think your opponent's going to lose their AA, or their AA is out of position.
So
you call this out.
Just sniped it with a Rhino.
Yes, exactly.
Fair enough.
So that's why you use a Kiowa Warrior.
Let's push on to our other options. We have vehicles, special forces, and infantry. Which do you want to handle first?
Let's do our vehicles and our infantry and special forces first.
Okay. That's a lot.
So, yeah, you get a lot of options here. What you're looking for as far as infantry goes, you're looking for infantry that can do stuff and that ideally the transport will provide some sort of utility. So, for example, as a non-option,
Ooh, I love
BGS,
non-options.
terrible option.
Yeah, now BGS I think they're the only militia recon squad, right? Let me see if I can
On
find them.
Blue 4 they are.
Yeah, man, I can't
On
find
Red
them.
4 you have
Yeah, there we are.
something I can't pronounce in the Eastern Bloc recon tab.
Gotcha. So these guys, non-option, 10 points, very cheap, but only good stealth and only 5 strength, militia training. They can't fight, they can't hide, and they can't spot. Well, I guess
And they
spot.
can't move as well, which is important.
Yeah, very slow, 15 kilometer per hour. So that's a non-option. What's a good actual option then?
So, Commando pair in the VAB 2013.
Yeah, okay.
You get a VAB.
Standard powerful option in Eurocore makes sense to be powerful here.
Yep. I don't think I have a single Blue Moto deck where this unit is absent.
And is the idea taking 4 at elite and using them sparingly, or 6 at veteran and sometimes they fight? What's the sort of goal here?
So, you're going to be using your recon infantry to fight. A lot of what you're taking in this deck means, as far as recon infantry goes,
Oh, are you still there?
why not use it to fight?
I think I lost you.
I'm here.
Oh, okay, you're
I am
back.
here.
You're back. We got as far as recon infantry goes, and you cut out.
Yeah. So, you want your recon infantry to be able to fight. Because they do get extra vet, which means they will win infantry fights. And they are a pretty important part of your deck. Being able to sneak around and kill some stuff, especially a VAB as fire sport, is important. And for that reason, I take them down vetted. I don't want to run out.
Gotcha. So we have 6. We actually have 2 cards available here, so 2 cards of Commandos Para. Is that worth taking 12 of these?
It is worth it. We won't do it in this deck, though. That is something that you would do to basically make up for a lack of shocks at that same price point in your infantry tab.
My guess is we're going to be looking at Jaeger 90 pretty soon.
We will be looking at them pretty soon, yeah, but for now we have another card that was worth taking.
Okay.
Looking at, rather.
And what would that be?
The Para Pathfinders.
Ooh, spicy. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab some Navy SEALs as well because I think that seems like a decent thing to talk about.
Yeah.
These guys are frag launcher infantry, and you know, I've seen them used. Han DeHun, who's on the channel quite a lot, very solid player, uses Navy SEALs when he plays US, and I use Parapathfinders when I play South Africa Moto, but they're really incredibly niche. So we have an elite option with the Navy SEALs, we have a shock option with Parapathfinders, and both of them, well, I guess neither of them, can handle anything with any significant amounts of armor at all. Which one of these guys do you take, and how do you use them to actually get return on investment?
Yeah, so I will answer the how do you use them first, and then I will get to which one to take, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, of course.
So, Para Pathfinders are a unit that you take when you absolutely need to win an infantry fight. Because the AGL, or I guess it's not an AGL, the grenade launcher is going to be really, really strong against other infantry. And what you try to do is you run them in double stacks into infantry, and you pair them with something like Gurkhas, for example.
Are we talking about towns or forests here?
Anywhere.
Ooh, okay.
Like these are one of your. If you run these in your deck, they are a crucial anti-mech tool actually, because when you play against a mech deck, the veterancy advantage that you have is negated. So you kind of want to have a card that will just auto win infantry fights. Similarly, when you play against Corps Marinaire, you want to have a card that will just auto win Corps Marinaire. A double stack of these will beat Corps Marinaire like 9 times out of 10.
Same thing holds true for Navy SEALs, I would imagine.
Yeah. So that's basically how you take them. And what you want to do to avoid the problems that you said is you pair them with some sort of high AT 20 rate of fire infantry. In South Africa, you get the high AT power, but you don't get the 20 rate of fire. So you can get overwhelmed by 5-point boxes and then suffer. However, here we have the Gurkhas. So the Gurkhas can really help alleviate those problems, and because the Gurkhas are 15 HP, they're going to really help tank against like mech decks and keep those Parapathfinders alive, so you can take some fights, go back, repair them, and then rinse repeat.
Yeah, and both of these are relatively fast as well. So the Gurkha's 90, 30 kilometers per hour, and I mean the Navy SEALs are 30. I think the Parapathfinders, they are shock. Man, I lost them right there. Yeah, so that's 25 instead of 30, but still a lot of speed on the ground. That can definitely be used to disengage. Maybe not 9 times out of 10 for the Parapathfinders, but certainly maybe 6 or 7 times out of 10, which is reliable enough.
Yeah, you will disengage quite often, and it'll be easy when you pair them up with Gurkhas, or if you have to pair them with other shock infantry, because those will be killing the transports and allow you to get away.
Gotcha. So now we've answered that usage case question. Now we have to make a choice. Parapathfinders, Navy SEALs.
So we want to pick Parapathfinders here for a few reasons. The biggest reason is the fact that we get 6 of them, and Navy SEALs get 4 of them. These are units that you're going to be calling out in a double stack. So if we look at this, how this works for Navy SEALs, you get 2 and that's it. For here, you get 3 of them.
So we are taking down vetted a veteran.
Yeah, the upvet's not going to matter too much here because your main DPS is coming from the grenade launcher, and it's 60% accuracy, short range. You're firing at 317 meters, so at most. So it's not going to be too much of a big deal if you lose veterancy on the Parapathfinders.
Gotcha. And let's talk vehicles then for the Parapathfinders. What are we taking this thing in?
Yeah, so you can justify 3 options. You can justify the 5-point truck if you just want to use them for town fighting and want them to be as cheap as possible, because they are 30 points as shock infantry. That's not cheap. So you can justify that. The other thing you can justify is a 10-pointer, because you don't want to pay an extra 5 points for the K car, because you're afraid that they'll be too expensive to call it for what you want. Because with a K car, it's a 45-point unit card. It's not cheap.
90 points for a double stack as opposed to if you take the Samuel 50, I mean, that's 70 points. That's a 20-point difference for a double stack. That's pretty significant, really.
Right. So, again, it just comes down to playtesting for which one you pick. If the price doesn't really matter all too much for you, you might as well go K car, because you're getting another autocannon, which is always nice. If the price starts to matter, then you look at a 10-pointer or a 5-pointer.
So what are we taking them in today?
We'll take them into K car.
All right. Seems good. We'll get the extra fire support, and then the only thing that we'd have to keep in mind if we're playing this deck is these guys will be less efficient in towns than they could be just because we're paying a bit more for a transport that can't fight between town blocks.
Yeah, it costs us something exactly.
Although I guess the other side of that would be if you were approaching a town and you left the K cars far enough back to not be taking fire, but they could still use their autocannon. I guess it's a bit more fire support there, but
it is a bit more fire support, but if you're not going to be just pushing into town with just these two guys, you'll have Amex 10 supporting, your other fire support from the infantry tab supporting.
So it's a little redundant for that role.
Yeah, like that's why I think, do I actually need these? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes it's nice to have more autocannons, sometimes I'd rather have it cheaper.
Gotcha. So we have 3 cards left. Are we switching over to vehicles, or is there more to look at here in infantry and special forces?
So we should check out special forces now. There are kind of a few different things you can pick up here. We will be taking the Jaeger 90, the Lynx, and I'll explain why.
Ooh, nice.
So the first thing to talk about are the SBS and the Lynx H7, because I think that's the easiest unit to compare to the Jaeger 90.
Okay, let me go ahead and grab this for comparison, and we're looking at the Special Boat Service from the UK.
So the SBS, compared to the Jaeger 90, just are worse in every single way.
Ran L4 is worse than the Mini-Me, M2 is worse than the M3, L34A1 is worse than the MP5. Wow.
I think they're both noise value 1 on the MP5 and the whatever the SMG is for the SBS, but really like worse launcher, much worse MG. The reason why you would ever take the SBS is that if you don't take SAS in your infantry tab, you want some card to helo drop with.
Right, so you could take this in the Lynx H7, which, as we've mentioned a couple times tonight, is a pretty strong helicopter.
Yeah. And that's the reason why you would ever take the SBS.
It makes sense. It makes sense. It looks like our previous choices have made Jaeger 90 a little bit better for us, but that isn't necessarily the case, especially if you are running a variation of this deck with some different choices involved in infantry, as you said earlier. So, all right, I like it. I like Jaeger 90 quite a bit. I will ask just briefly if you compare these guys to something like the where are they? The cheaper, like the NZSAS at 25 points.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, like, yes, the NZSAS are cheaper, but your launcher really sucks. Like, as you're gonna have these guys operate independently. Is the idea, and you want something that you can heal drop with as recon, and you can't do that with the NZSAS. The Jaeger can be independent because you have an M3 and a Mini. The NZSAS are more like a type of card you would take for town grinding because they're cheap elites.
Yeah, and they get that job done. But okay, it's something that we don't really seem to need, especially if we're relying on the Parapathfinders for that just sheer infantry killing power in towns.
And on top of that, in our infantry tab as well, we have the Norland Jaeger SASF combo. We can just stick in a town and forget about it.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, 15 strength. All right, I'm convinced. I think this is good. With 2 cards left, are we putting in more elites, or are we moving over to...
There are 2 more elites to talk about.
Ooh, okay.
The next one to talk about are the Korean Special Forces, which I don't know how to pronounce the name. I'm sorry. There you go.
Best guess.
I mean, it's an elite unit that has a carbine and a Mini-Me, and is really good.
Yeah, geez. I mean, the M727 carbine, Mini-Me. I'm a little bit underwhelmed by the M2, but what's the other one that we're looking at?
Like you tend to you take these in ground transports basically. So if you're taking the ground transport, then yeah, you do take this over the Jaeger 90, which is why you never see Jaeger 90, I think, in my opinion at least, in the 5-point Jupiter. Because if you're doing that, I can just get a lot of recon with the Korean Special Forces in a recon vehicle.
Yeah,
and we'll have a carbine enemy.
And a 50 cal, which infantry to infantry engagements is sometimes relevant.
Absolutely.
Man, this is a marathon video. Oh my goodness. I'm doing a stretch.
There are a lot of choices.
I'm doing a big stretch here. Alright. Whew, let's keep moving. Let's keep
Yeah,
moving.
and the last that you may consider taking are the Fern Spare.
Front spotter,
Um,
really?
yeah,
These guys are
basically,
like polar opposites.
yeah. I would not take this ever for someone who's like his first time Moto deck, but if you want to basically play like an ass, you run these with the Rhino, and you put them in annoying places. You spot for the Rhino, you kill the stuff, and you sneak away
Oh
because
my
you have the
gosh.
exceptional stealth.
So you
It's
even like turn the
super
guns
neat.
off.
Yeah, you just turn the guns off and walk around. It's super, super niche. The only reason why you take them over the air snipers is because your helicopter has 10 HP and is pretty quick. Um, it's really, really niche though.
Gotcha. We'll stay away from niche choices tonight. I think we've made that decision once already,
Yeah,
and we'll stick to it. So no Fernsbacher for us, but keep in mind you can do this, and particularly to encourage use of the Rhino, which is, as we said before, this is a responsive call, not a proactive thing to support the front line. But if you're increasing the number of chances that you have to spot something in the back line that's valuable, that does seem worthwhile.
yep. So vehicles.
Oh, we get the Verkenning.
You get the Verkenning, you get the Dutch Amex 13, you get the French Amex 13,
Oh,
you
the
get
Bradleys?
Bradleys, you get a ton of good stuff.
You know, those tracks are so motorized, they almost look like wheels to me.
See, that's the spirit.
Oh my god. M41A1 as well. I mean, what? This is a bag of mechanized goodies.
Hey, you get like everything you could ever want in this deck, in all honesty, for as far as recon goes.
Yeah,
Like you're missing a Tiger longbow, but horrors, it's prototyped.
just naively, I would just do, frankly, I would just do this probably.
Yeah, that is something that you could do. However, we have recon Amex 10 and recon Boy Cats as well.
Yeah, well, so these, I mean, fast wheels, guns, yeah, holy, so many good options. I am going to ask you about this one, though, because this is a question that I think about relatively often. MX-10 RC versus the 50-point Rurocat 76.
Very good question. The Amex 10, because it's cheaper and has 9 rate of fire, will be better for supporting infantry fights. After your initial opener, because you will be using these on your opener. Like, as far as opener composition goes, I wanted like 2 tank tab Amex 10s and either like one of these fast recon vehicles here. So you will have to think about what you want to do with this after the fact. The Amex 10, just solid good all around. The Roycat is a bit more specific. Because it has 7.5 rate of fire, it doesn't show properly, but it is 7.5. And the gun is as anemic. It's not going to be as good for long-term supporting infantry fights, especially because you're HG2. However, you have ridiculous off-road speed, which can let you do some funny timing. It lets you find gaps. It has very good optics, which is actually a pretty big deal.
No, when I was playing SA Moto, I found gaps with this thing. That was my favorite thing to do. You take this thing, you drive it off-road through a forest. You don't even attack move because it has a 60% stabilizer. And the next thing you know, you spot a command tank and rear shot it.
Yep, that's something you can do. And the cool thing actually with attack moving with this, because it has very good optics, if you attack move into a forest and infantry on the edge of the forest, you'll be able to spot and shoot the infantry before it can shoot you, in most cases.
And then stop, and because it won't see you, it won't shoot you, and you get the first shot off. But do you get the second, or does it then see you because you fired?
Oh no, it will see you, but you'll be firing outside of launcher range in most cases.
Wow. That's
It is
actually
one of the
really
nice
useful.
things about very good optics.
And the AMX 10RC, of course, only gets good instead of very good, which is one step lower. So
Right. I
that's
think
what,
either or is
200-ish
fine.
meters?
Sorry?
That's like, what, 200-ish meters?
I would have to like check a spreadsheet because I don't know those numbers off the top of my head. I do know though that with the AMX 10, it is a lot easier to get shot as opposed to having very good optics.
Gotcha. Well, with how we've built our deck today, which one of these two are we looking for?
It's personal preference, honestly.
Hurukat 76 for me, just because, I may only call in 4 of them, but, man, when these guys hit, they really hit.
I would actually keep it down vetted because I have gone through more than 4 in a game and have found that I needed more. Because remember, you're playing a Moto deck, so you're calling at least 1, if not 2 of these in the opener. So you don't want to have just two for the rest of the game potentially.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So moving on to that last slot, is it competition between these two tanks, or are there other things to consider as well?
I mean, you can put any of the AMX-13s in. You can put the Verkenning in. The M3A1 or the M3A2 Bradley are both good options.
So what it comes down to for these, it looks like to me, is do you want an ATGM, or do you want something that's either going to mulch infantry with the FL-12 or be a legitimate anti-tank threat with the Verkenning?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the right way to look at it. For how we've built our deck, because we are not taking a second tank tab, so like a second card in our tank tab, I think the Verkenning is the best option because it is just a little bit more expensive. You know, it has a bit more front armor, and it has, well, not as much AP as a AMX-10. It has 10 rate of fire.
So if we had taken a second tank, particularly something like the STRV 103C, would you recommend something like the M3A1?
Yeah, you could definitely take that. I run both. I run both the M3A1 and the M3A2, and I like them both. In either case, you'll upvet them. And it's really just a question of if you want to call it units that's going to be expensive enough, but not too expensive. Like,
Gotcha.
I call it the M3A1 when I found that the M3A2 was too expensive for me to call out in the deck I had built, but I wanted something cheaper, and then I called it, and then I would use the M3A1. However, if my deck was cheap enough because of all the other choices that we made, then I'd rather have the M3A2 because 20 versus 25 is a pretty big deal
Gotcha.
as far as AP goes.
Well, we're going to go with the Verkenning, and we have 3 tabs left. We're getting there. And I am going to unfortunately have to ask that we get there a little bit quick. It's now officially 5 minutes to 2 in the morning for me. And I am doing my darndest to be as bright-eyed and bushy-tailed as I can, as chipper as possible. But I'll admit, I've probably got about another 45 minutes or so left in me, and then I may actually be able to go to bed, and I do have work in the morning. So let's go through it, and I'll probably clip that out of the actual tab-by-tab things, but we're done with recon, we're moving on to vehicles, and we have just these 3 tabs. And, you know, thinking back to when we were talking about the infantry tab, I said, look, we've done 2, and we've spent a third. We've really stretched those activation points. I've really been pretty impressed, and I think a lot of that comes from only 1 tank. But we do have a lot of slots here in vehicle. We do have a fair number of important slots in helicopter and air to get to. So how do we start looking at this vehicle tab? What's important, and what do we want to talk about today?
So, most important unit that you must take, it is mandatory, no exceptions in my opinion, in Blue Moto, is the Rover Wombat.
Yeah, so this is one of those recoilless rifle jeeps with a reputation, because 1925 meter range is, I think, the best of any recoilless rifle jeep in the game. 14 AP power is, again, really powerful for these jeeps. Some coalitions only have access to 12. Some have to pay a bit more to get up to 14. So this is really the best of every world with recoilless rifle jeep, and we're going to take upvet or downvet here.
So, you'll take them upvetted. Even if you run 2 cards, you take them upvetted. Sorry, if only you run 1 card, you always take it upvetted because you really want them to hit. And these are important in Blue Moto because 10-point jeeps in general are just free initiative. Like, you can spend 50, 60 points, which is nothing, and have 5 or 6 wombats that, if you have 5 or 6 of them, will kill a martyr too.
Oh, that just hurts my soul. Actually happened to me, again, to reference that Kadi game against Blue Moto. Like, it was super upsetting. I killed the first 2 wombats, and it didn't matter. The third one got the kill.
Like, wombats are so important because they allow you to play so much wider than, I think, any other deck in the opener aside from, like, basically mass healer drops. Like, just to give an example here, if you're playing Punch Bowl, you can afford, from the side that gets to town first or the other side. So from the side that gets to town first, you can afford to push every single critical zone on Punch Bowl in the opener because you have wombats.
Yeah.
You can call out 5 or 6 wombats for the 1-pointers, take it. Because you get the town first, you can put infantry there, take it. And you can have wombats for pushing the 2-pointer because they're so cheap.
That is just gross. Everything about that whole... I mean, I get that it works as a strategy, and I really hope that nobody ever does it to me. So.
They're actually that strong. And the nice thing is they have great off-road speed, which is really useful for just attack moving and then forgetting about it, because they're not going to be so slow they die to a tank or an autocannon.
We have a lot of other slots, and the thing about vehicle tabs is I think most people view the vehicle tab as a sort of ugly duckling. where it doesn't really get a lot of play. You're going to be taking something like a Rover Wombat if you have it. You're going to be taking something like the I Sherman if you have it. Some people love the Ontos, some people love the M163, but we have a lot of these. Some people like this sorts of units. How many of them can we fit in here? And other than the Wombat, what are we going to be looking at?
Yeah, so because we are taking a Rhino, we need a pseudo spag in our deck. So that means we have to take at least one more card, which will end up being the CS. And just because of how the points are going to end up working out at the end of the day, we will take a third vehicle tab as well. Because you have access to all of the unprotoed blue vehicles, you get a lot of just good options overall.
Like what?
So I think the first thing to look at is the Amex 10P Milan, all at the very top.
Okay, AMX 10P Milan, and that's
This
going
can
to be
be
the 25-pointer.
Yeah, because you have so many infantry and so many like different vehicle options, you can pick like the exact vehicle you want for a certain scenario. And the MX 10P Milan can be nice because it can be nicer than a double stack of these of you know a good anti-infantry autocannons that with the AT gem that can fire at the same time.
And 3 frontal armor, so at the very least,
Yeah,
even if they're not well protected, they're certainly not the squishiest.
yeah.
Gotcha.
So that's an option to look for. The next one is the ERC 90.
We're gonna miss the opportunity to call someone a Pratt?
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. ERC 90, that's the French 20-point wheeled vehicle.
Yeah. So these are kind of useful for post opener on lighter flanks where you want the one front armor to protect you from autocannons and the 10 HP, and you want just something that that can do infantry fire support at 10 rate of fire. You can
Gotcha.
call it like 2 or 3 of these. You're never going to really go through a full card, but like a double or triple stack on a flank and maybe some more later on in the game can be really nice because it's 10 rate of fire at 20 points with 1925 range.
They seem almost like the big brother of the Rover Wombat.
Almost, yeah. Like the Rover Wombat, I tend to use more as an opener unit, or unless I want to rush somebody later on in the game in a certain area. The ERC 90 is something's more established. It's a little bit lighter, and I want I want that same type of fire support, but more sustained. The Rover Wombat has great burst DPS, but pretty poor overall sustained DPS because it has 7 rate of fire. The ERC 90 has less burst DPS because 11 versus 14 AP can make a difference. However, it has 10 rate of fire.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It is twice as also because it's twice as expensive. You have less burst DPS as well because 2 versus 1.
Gotcha. Now, just because it is one of my favorite units, especially when I am playing just Israel, I do have to ask you if I can find it. Oh my goodness. If I can find it, the I Sherman, does that have a place here to sort of allow you to have a bit of a mechanized-ish push?
Yeah, but you'll take the M18 instead.
And can you explain why?
Yeah, so when we compare the M18, sorry, not the M18, the M36, my bad. I always mix up the names here. You're paying 5 points less, and you're not really losing that much. Yes, you lose 1 rate of fire, which actually is significant, but 8 versus 9 AP doesn't mean anything, and 2 versus 3 front armor doesn't really mean all too much for the price. So you're basically getting everything you want from the Sherman, but just 5 points cheaper.
And if it is, in the end of the day, just a little bit worse, keep in mind, too, you get 3 M36s for the price of 2 I Shermans.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Like the prices of these lower cost units really do make a pretty big deal.
Gotcha. So, which one of these are we taking for our third vehicle slot?
We'll take actually the Ratel ZT3 AT gem carrier.
Ooh, man. I
You have
believe
a
that's
like
up here.
you can really take a lot of different things for this third vehicle slot. Like you could take a second card of Wombats if you want. You could take ERC 90, Amex 10P Milan, the M18s. You could take the Ontos as well if you felt like it. But having the Ratel AT gem carrier can be nice when you don't have the Bradley because it has a lot of the problems solved that a lot of AT gem vehicles deal with. It's got 2 front armor, so it's going to be a lot harder to one-shot. You need AP 20 to one-shot this with kinetic, and AP 16 with heat. It has a salvo size of 3,
Which, other
It's
than
got
being
these,
a little unique, is actually pretty nice.
yeah, like you can just let off a bunch of AT real quick, and it's also fast. The one caveat with this unit is that if you use it just by itself, like you could potentially do with a Bradley, it will die because it doesn't have stealth. But what you can do is you use this with other ATGMs, and you basically layer your ATGMs, which makes it very hard to deal with.
Gotcha. And the high base accuracy, I imagine, makes this thing very reliable comparatively.
Yeah, 100%.
Now,
And
I
you're
did joke
also
about the
upgrading it.
Pratt earlier, but I am also going to ask about that here because 20 versus 25 AP seems significant if you're going to be running into things like M91 AV Horse.
Hmm. Yeah, so you're generally not going to have to worry about super heavies when you play Moto deck because it's a waste of points for someone to call it super heavy against you in the first place. Because what tanks are there to kill? None.
Right, so if they do, it's
Um,
almost a blessing in disguise because it's going to take them so long to get that value back, I suppose.
exactly.
So just ignore it, play around it.
You can play around it. You can play for side shots on it. You can just zone it out. It's not super heavies really aren't that big of a deal in most cases when you play Moto decks.
Gotcha. And are we taking 7 at Veteran or 10 at Hardened?
Uh, I barely use three in a game, so veteran.
7 at Veteran it is.
Yeah.
And with that, unless we have any closing comments on vehicles, we are going to wrap up the vehicle tab and move on to helicopters.
Yep.
Fair enough. Okay, so helos, I imagine a lot of this is going to suffer from not having protos, but the last time I said that, I think you very quickly said, it's not as important as you think. Is this another case of you kind of get what you want anyway?
Yeah. Like for example, you get the Apache. That's not protoed.
Wait, the Apache isn't proto? Where? Oh man, you're right. Yeah,
Like if you
I guess in NORAD this is an often overlooked unit, and I think rightly so. But here, yeah, okay.
yeah, here it shines. Like in US or NORAD, there's no point taking it because for 30 points more, you might as well get the cancer that is the longbow. But you don't have that here. You have the Apache. We're not. This is a usual pick of mine, but because we have the Kiowa, we don't need the extra Hellfires here, and it's going to be a little bit overkill with the Apache. So we're not going to take this in our deck specifically. What we need is a cheaper rocket pod helicopter.
So before we say that, I just want to really punch that point home. Basically, what I heard is if you don't take the Kiowa WR, then the Apache really does have a powerful place in this deck.
Yes, 100%.
Gotcha.
Like,
So
if we take the Recon Cobra instead, and we also free up a Recon slot, and we put whatever we want in there, then we can take the Apache, and maybe something else potentially.
Gotcha. So you said cheap rocket pods. What comes to mind for me is maybe the AH-1S Cobra. And if you're looking for truly cheap, I've always wanted this one to work. I don't know if it does, but the Heavy Hog.
Yeah, as much as it might be kind of a fun way to roleplay Vietnam,
It
it
kind of
is,
is.
it is fundamentally a Huey. It is a fundamentally a flying death trap.
Yeah, for 35 points, that seems a bit much. Especially, I mean, keep in mind with like the thing that I just reminded myself of is we have Lynx AH-7s.
Yes.
So for the same point cost, we get 6 strength, and it's faster.
And
So
comes with infantry.
yeah, that's fair. That's fair. All right, well I sit corrected. We're not looking at the Heavy Hog. What are we looking at instead?
So, it's kind of we picked it safe a B, because it's got rocket pods and a Vulcan. It is slightly better than the AH-1J because for whatever Eugen magic reasons, it's more fuel efficient.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it's got 1,500 fuel versus 1,000 fuel.
That is just wacky. I mean, it's the same helicopter. It's literally the same helicopter exported to 2 different countries.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the H1J didn't paint a dragon on the side, and, that clearly just increases your fuel. Is that a... Wait, what is that?
Cobra.
Oh, I get it.
Yeah.
Oh, I wish I didn't. Okay, so FAB it is, and are we looking at 6 at Hardened or 8 at Trained?
I'm a helo spammer. I like to have more helos. I can see why someone would just want to up that though.
Gotcha. So 8, but 6 isn't a bad answer.
Yeah.
And then what are we
And
looking here? Are we doing a second card, or are we
nope,
using those 10 activation points for air?
those will all be going into the air tab. There
Ah,
are kind of a few more things to look at just as options to keep in mind.
okay.
Um, the first one of which is the AH1T.
The
This
AH1T.
this is kind of at this price point the best option that you can pick that packs a punch and is cheap. Because you have Toe 2s and you have Rocket Pods and you have a Vulcan. Like the obvious comparison here is either like any of the AH1S Cobras or the AH1F if you want to look at the US one.
Yeah.
10 points for a Toe 2 is easily worth it.
Oh yeah, I mean 10% accuracy and 5% stabilizer, and I think it works like this, but correct me if I'm wrong. Even if you're moving when you fire the missile, if you stop the helicopter, it then switches to the 70% accuracy. Is that the case?
That is what is displayed. I'm choosing my words very carefully here
Whether or not it's true.
because... Sorry?
Whether or not it's true.
Yeah, that I don't know and I haven't bothered to explore. Um,
Sounds like a
I'm
god
not
awful
as
unit
certain for
test.
that. Like, you'd probably have to do a ton of tests. It'd be really painful. And frankly, I'm not like I think it's more of like a knowledge for the sake of knowledge thing as opposed to actually practically impacting what you would do.
Gotcha, but the 25 AP versus 20 does seem very, very impactful here. The other
Yes.
comparison that comes to mind, though, has to be the Apache.
Yeah.
Now, it's a lot more expensive. 30 points for the helicopter is a lot expensive, but you get 2 strength for that. You actually get medium optics instead of poor, so, it can see a little bit better. And
Said.
the Hellfires have longer range, which means you can play it a little bit farther back and be, you're a little bit safer at 8 strength to 6. You're also a little bit safer because you have a longer reach with the helicopter. So, is there a reason to take the H1T instead of the Apache?
If you want something that's a bit cheaper, and that's really it. Usually, I always take the Apache for exact reasons that you said. It's got armor. It's got eight strength, and the Hellfires are longer range, and
Fair enough.
one more AP. That's the reasons why you said are exact reasons why I tend to take the Apache over the H1T. But again, like it's not like the H1T is a bad helicopter. It's in fact a very good helicopter.
Yeah, I love
I
it
just
playing
tend-
Blue Dragons.
Yeah, like I just tend to value the Apache over the H1T, even though it's 30 more points. Because I call this type of helicopter out pretty rarely.
Gotcha. Alright,
Um,
so let's go ahead and I think we're going to do a combined video here. Helicopter
There's
tab and... Oh, I'm really... Okay,
one
yeah.
more. There's one more pick. Sorry.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
The other pick you can do is a Celtic.
Yeah. Now, I know a lot of people who hate the Celtic when they're actually playing something like Eurocore because you have the Tiger Hap, is it?
Yes,
But you don't have that here, do you?
correct. The reasons for hating the Celtic are totally valid in Eurocore. The Tiger Hap exists. It's better. Why would you ever pick a Celtic? In Blue Moto, if you want to do escort or helo drop, you will basically take 2 of these in the opener and try to keep them alive afterward. And
It's
you
gonna be
really want to
tough.
go with either 2 or none of them because they trade effectively in groups of 2. In groups of 1, they're just kind of sad.
Huh. Can you explain a little bit of why that is? Because, I mean, I would think that one, you still have a 26, 25 meter range, 5 HE hits pretty hard, 60% accuracy, and stabilizer is very nice. What makes it so special when you have 2?
So I think the easiest way to explain this is with an example. Let's say you're playing against the USSR and they have a K-52. If you both engage and you both get exactly 1 missile off, the K-52 may kill you, and because you're 4 strength, you're dead. That's over, even if you hit.
So it's less having to
Um,
do with your ability to deal damage than it is your ability to take damage.
It has more to do with your ability to trade effectively. If you have 2 of these and you charge into a K-52, you're probably going to lose 1 of them, but you'll kill the K-52. So you've traded 70 points for 130. That's worth it. Same
Yeah.
thing with Tiger as well.
Fair enough. And would you take these up or down vetted?
I take them down vetted because when I do take them, I use them as a critical part of my AA network, and there are certain players who will be helo spammy where these can be useful against. Like again, he's not playing now, but if you play Putin 187 in ranked, he will have a lot of helicopters, and having 4 Celtics can be pretty useful, and they will up that if you play against him.
Gotcha. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And with that out of the way, I think we will move over to air, and we have enough activation points left to, my complete surprise, by the way, to put in 4 planes if we so choose, which can be so incredibly powerful with all the things you have access to. Let's go ahead, and I always like to lead things off with a discussion of seed. Is it worth it in this deck? And if so, what do you bring?
100%. So remember how you were talking about losing access to proto things and how it can be a pretty big detriment?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Raven's not protoed.
Oh, no. Oh, my
And
goodness.
on top of that, the Cheetah D is not protoed.
Yeah, and the Cheetah D is even multi-roll because you can fire a position with the seed. Although I've been disappointed by the Cheetah D recently. I don't particularly love it. I like it better as close air support than I do as an actual seed plane, which is
Yep.
kind of a problem.
Yep. That's
But
about right.
I mean, the Raven, 60% ECM, 1,000 kilometers per hour, pretty tight turning radius as well for that expensive of a plane, and that quick of a plane in particular. And you get really excellent range. Only 2 missiles, but 20 AP power, high base accuracy, and stabilizer. I'm just gonna say, I would look at this, see the Raven, and go, "Yep, okay, we're taking it." And the
Yeah.
only thing I'd consider maybe competitive is the Kurnos 2000 because you can take 2 of them, but I don't know if that's good as
So
something to think about.
there are kind of 3 seed options that you can pick. The Raven and the Cheetah D are 2 of them. The Cheetah D if you want to have a more multi-role type of plane. The Raven if you want more pure seed. And option number 2 is the Prowler,
Really?
because that's not proto as well. The Kurnas 2000 doesn't have any stealth, so it's pretty easy to see coming, and you don't need the long-range missile aspect on it. Meanwhile, the Prowler has 50 ECM, because it does, is cheap, and you get 2 of them.
Yeah, okay, that does solve that problem. I think for right now,
So,
let's stick the Raven in here, but
yep,
like,
I 100% agree.
it's a lot of strong options. Okay, so we've moved on from seed. Are we going to take a look at ASF and interceptor sort of options, or are we going to move on to multi-role or bombers?
ASFs and interceptors.
Okay.
We'll take the Tomcat out of the discussion, sadly, because it's too low of a vet and only has 1 per card, so it
Yeah.
can't really do all that much.
Okay, so let's take the interceptors out, and we still have a lot of options, including the F-15C Eagle, which, despite being very expensive, is, I mean, it's a whole lot of good stats. Is it too expensive, though? Do you want something cheaper, or is there just something I'm overlooking here?
So you're only going to be taking 1 card of ASFs. So it can be a little bit dangerous to take a super ASF as your only ASF. That being said, Tortique, who's the other kind of main Blue Moto player in ranked, when I
Yeah,
last
that
saw
was
his
an
deck,
unpleasant
took
game.
the F-15C as his only ASF. So it can be done. I personally dislike this though, but it is it can be done if you are willing to rely pretty heavily on your ground AA.
Gotcha. So if you don't do that, you're looking more at what, the 120 point range?
So I mean, if you look at the 100, if you look at the 120 point range, the standout option is the Block 15. The things that you would compare it to are the Tornado F2 and the Mirage 2000.
So that's the French and the Mirage 2000, and that's going to be the British Tornado F2.
Yeah, the Block 15 is going to basically do everything better. Your gun is going to be better than the Tornado's gun because you get more suppression and more accuracy, and I believe the rate of fire is a bit higher. I believe the Vulcan has a 0.2 shot reload. I believe the Tornado F2s has a 0.4.
Plus your missiles are a little bit better. Granted,
Yeah.
mostly in the anti-helo capability, but yeah.
Well, it also makes a difference with plane range as well and the accuracy there, because in a head-on fight, you will feel it.
Now, does the 4 versus 2 matter at all for the Sky Flashes versus the Sparrows?
Yes, that is kind of the one slightly disappointing thing with the Block 15, but if you want quantity, instead of just pure cheap cost effectiveness, you pick a different ASF at a different price point.
Yeah, something like maybe the F3?
Less to F3, but more the F-15J, which you would compare to like the A Eagle and the Canadian Hornet.
Gotcha, so the F-15J, and we're going to compare this to the F-15A. 130 points versus 140 points, and we have 4 Sparrows on each one. Same missile name, different, well, no, same picture, same stats, and it looks like the anti-helo is a little bit different as well. Is the F-15J really worth the 10 points, though?
Yeah, because you also get 10 ECM.
Oh yeah, look at that, 30 versus 40. That makes a huge difference.
So
Uh,
10 ECM plus the better missiles for short range, um,
Same
makes it
veterancy as
better.
well. All
And
right,
then when you look at this compared to like the Canadian Hornet as well, you'll reach a pretty much the exact same conclusion.
gotcha. Well, I'm gonna go with two of these up vet. I know that there are a couple options here, but I like four missiles. I don't really mind the semi-active that much, but I love 40% ECM, saving my bacon on some bad micro, and I don't trust myself to only have one F-15C.
Fair.
This is what I'm gonna throw in, but it sounds like there was a lot of good options, and you sort of got to figure out, are you comfortable with that sort of play? Like I know people who will take one Rafale, and that's all they use, but that's not me. That is very
Yeah,
much
like
not me.
really in my mind, there are kind of three main options I go for. Either Block 52 if I want fire and forget missiles, F-15J or Block 15.
You know, the other day I shot down an RBT with an F-104G. Does that make it into an air superiority fighter?
In your heart, it does.
In my heart. It was on Hell, and it was an overextended RBT, but still, we got there. We got there. Okay, so other options, things that we talked about earlier, and if you're watching the standalone instead of the live slash the full video, this will be on a previous day. But we talked about two planes in particular, and I want to bring them both up right now, and that's going to be the A-10 Thunderbolt. It's also going to be the Nighthawk, neither of which are prototyped, I think,
The
and
Nighthawk is, thank
oh
God.
shoot, yeah, okay.
But you get other units.
Okay, so
Um,
what's our second option here?
so well,
Ooh.
instead of the Nighthawk, I think well, do you want to take the talk about the must-have first before
Sure,
you do
yeah.
AT gem planes?
Yeah, let's talk about the
I think if you
must-haves.
don't take the Kurnas, you're shooting yourself in the foot.
Fair enough. Okay, let's switch over
Um,
to just Israel, and I mean the Kurnos is like it's the Israeli Nighthawk to a
yeah.
certain extent. And do we take one at elite or two at rookie?
You want as many as you can get because this thing is flying cancer. And frankly, why it is not protoed is beyond me. The blue air tab would be much more interesting if it was protoed,
So,
but
what kind of
it's
things
not.
can this kill?
Anything.
Even four sorry, even four top armor tanks?
If you get really lucky and you get a crit, yes. More often than not, they'll need to be damaged first. And you need a double hit on the laser guided bombs, but you can kill anything. It's a very strong
Oh my
plane.
goodness! And you actually do get four sparrows on top of it. So I guess if you have it, I wouldn't recommend sending it out first. But if you've already bought a Kurnos and you're sending out an F-15J, is it the stupidest thing to send this thing out behind it?
Yes, you don't want to waste these in a multi-role at all, unless if you know all of the ASS are dead and you're using it very far from AA. It is critical you keep these alive as long as possible because they kill infantry, they kill tanks. Um, they're amazing. Like
Fair
20
enough.
HE on two LGBs is ridiculous.
So that's the must-have. Now let's talk about the flexible. And the things that come to mind for me, one of them's a Thunderbolt. The other is going to have to be, where is it? Let's find it here. It's going to have to be the Block 5, and it's also going to have to be the Fighting Falcon.
Yeah, so you're not going to really take the Fighting Falcon because you have the Kurnas, and your threat here is less infantry because you have veterancy to deal with that in other infantry fights, and your threat are more like vehicles.
In which case, the Block 5 seems a decent choice.
Yeah, you can run Block 5 um, and just call it a day, and I've done that before. You do have to keep in mind though that if you only run the Block 5, you don't have actual ATGMs, which
Yeah.
can be problematic.
I mean, at that point, all we'd have are the Milan 2s on the ground and the Rathel ZT3A1 on the ground. And in this version of the deck, we don't even have it in helicopters short of the Kiowa WR. So that actually might be a more attractive option to me if I had the Apache.
Mhm.
Otherwise, I think I do want something with ATGMs. And is there any competition to the Thunderbolt too?
Yes. So to get the kind of the this out of the way, I don't think the Peace Pheasant is a good pick in Blue Moto. even though it's a great pick in Blue Dragons, because one of the major strengths of the Peace Pheasant is that you get 2 cards in Blue Dragons.
But here you can't really
Um,
afford that. And I mean, people never
right.
expect 4 Peace Pheasant 2s, even though it's such a powerful thing.
But like, in what's great about this in Blue Dragons is you can afford to lose them and to trade effectively because you have so many. But that's not the case here.
So what are we looking
Um,
at instead?
so you have the Peace Shrine as an option because it's a Peace Shrine. It's good in Eurocore, it'll be good here. You have the A10, which basically, if you take the A10, you have to take the Hawk Pip 3 in your support tab. You have the Baroque
Um,
because
yeah.
it's got 4 missiles, either AP-26,
I think
it
of it
can
as a super
multi-roll,
Peace
a
Run.
solid ATG gem plane overall.
Yeah. This
Um,
thing has let me down a couple of times, but I really just think of it as a super Peace Run. It's 35 points more expensive, but it's 4 missiles instead of 2, and it can still multi-roll.
yeah, and you have the Sea Hornet as your main
Sea
options to pick from.
Hornet. So that's going to be, what, American?
Yes,
And
it's
let's
basically the
find it.
grown-up version of the Baroque.
FA-18C. Wow, 4 Fire and Forget, 30 AP. Goodness gracious sakes alive. Okay.
Yeah, so either of those options are fine. Um, if you kind of want to emulate the US plane tab, you can take the A10, as long as you get the Hawk Pip 3. But if you want something cheaper, or that's a bit more flexible, not so much as like speed caps like the A10, the Baroque is an option, the Peace Run is an option, the Sea Hornet's also an option.
You know, I think I'm going to make a controversial pick here, and, well, because we did say the Thunderbolt 2 earlier, I really just can't keep this thing alive, and the Sea Hornet has 40% ACM, it's very fast, and the Fire and Forgets, I mean, this thing fires pretty quick, and it's the third volley in particular that takes a long time, I think, for the Thunderbolt 2 to get out. So I think I'm going to take the Sea Hornet, and I really, my takeaway from that last discussion of the ATGM planes is that you have a bunch of good options, and particularly if you take the PIP 3 and you can really protect those pretty well from ASFs, there's a lot of flexibility. So see what works for you, figure out what you like, what you don't like for these sorts of planes, and go from there. And we have, with that, built a deck. So LordPie, thank you for joining me for this. Thank you for helping me build my first ever Blue 4 Moto deck for 1v1 ranked sort of games. And yeah, it's been a pleasure having you on.
I've had a really great time, and just, sorry, one more quick correction. The Hornet should be downfetted.
Oh my goodness, I am so bad at this.
Yeah, because you don't want
sometimes.
you don't want to accidentally throw away your 1 Hornet to 9 HE crit.
Yeah, that's fair. That's entirely
Yeah.
fair.
I have had a great time recording this video with you. Thank you so much for having me on.
I hope we can do something again soon, and worst case, I will see you around on boot camp. I think we've got a couple of tourney games that we'll both be chiming in to watch. So with that, everyone, have a nice night. Depending on your time zone, have a nice morning. And we're going to be clipping these out tab by tab during the next week. So if you missed anything, and if you just are catching this at the end, or if you want to go back and look at anything specifically, don't hesitate to check that out. And don't hesitate to check out the Bootcamp Discord as well. Great place for 1v1s. Great place to meet some players who really know what they're talking about and are very happy to help newer players figure out how to get past those first couple of really daunting games. So thank you guys for your time and for tuning in, and we'll see you again real soon.
Take care.